What's up everyone? Welcome back. In this video we are gonna see what if Naruto was raised by his father Minato. If you guys like my videos and want to see more what ifs, hit the like and subscribe button. Also turn on the notification to all, so you never miss any updates. Now let's begin. The death wrought too soon. 1 hour old, outskirts of Konoha. Minato stumbled slightly as his feet touched the rocky ground of the place of ceiling where he had placed Kushina and Naruto. Even a shinobi such as he could not help the slight fumbling of the steps. He was chakra exhausted, worried, and grief-stricken over what he knew he had to do. Nevertheless, he was not the Yondaime Hokage for no reason. A second later he felt the Kyuubi land behind him, uplifting huge boulders as the bulk of the massive beast sunk into the ground. Minato used a force to propel himself to his wife and son, scooping them up in his arms and landing gently on some untouched ground. "Gotta put up a barrier," the blonde-haired shinobi muttered, shifting Kushina to his left side while making a seal with his right. Instantly streams of light arose from the ground, forming a dome over their heads and blocking out the angry roars of the Kyuubi from the outside world. Minato let out a sigh of relief when the task was done and set Kushina down on the ground. Naruto instantly started crying. Minato let out a light chuckle, glad that his son seemed like a healthy baby at least. It would make him that much more likely to survive what Minato was about to do. Minato gazed sadly upon his little boy. Naruto was cuddled in his mother's arms, who herself had her eyes closed despite the fact that Minato had moved them and suddenly Minato had a very bad feeling about this. Kushina. He shook her shoulders roughly, but she gave no response. Naruto started wailing louder. His hand dropped from her shoulder, his blue eyes disbelieving as he searched her face. There was a smile on her pallid demeanor, her lips slightly parted as if giving thanks. There was a billion things he wanted to say to her, about how she was the one who had made him Hokage, about how if she weren't there, he probably would have died a long time ago. About the fact that he felt as if his world was ending, that he was even mad because she had died before him. But there was no point to that, now, because it was just a dead body in front of him, and the unconquerable fiery spirit of Uzumaki Kushina was gone. He choked slightly, in grief, and brushed back a strand of her long flaming hair. Minato simply knelt there for a moment, head down and body shaking, tears streaming from his eyes. Not Kushina, never Kushina. He had seen many a shinobi die in the fields, and as a Hokage he had even sent some of them to their deaths. He had even seen both of his teammates and one of his precious students die. He had drunk himself to sleep and then some on those nights, but he had always the comforting presence of his favorite Redeed. Now though, he honestly just wanted to give up and follow her. He wanted to be with her again. But no, Kushina would hate him if he did that. Minato closed his eyes, then opened them again. He took Naruto from Kushina's arms, so limp, so lifeless, and stood. Immediately he started grafting a seal on Naruto's tummy, ignoring the cries and wondering briefly how the Kyuubi still hadn't found them, but grateful for it nonetheless. His plan was to make his son into the new Jinchuriki, and with the power of the Kyuubi at his disposal, Naruto would be able to take Madara. And then, Minato hesitated. He was under no illusions that Naruto would be treated poorly by at least some people. Oh yes, Minato did hope that the splendor of Konoha would shine through, but he also knew the nature of humans all too well. And without Kushina there, who could help Naruto learn to control the Kyuubi? The lonely father paused in his seal making. He had originally planned to put a part of himself inside to act as a fail-safe, in case anything progressed to a point of seemingly no return, but that plan was only feasible if Kushina would be there the next time to help Naruto get completely control of the Kyuubi. Letting out a breath, Minato quickly changed the seal, and it was just then that the Kyuubi turned to look at them. The red eyes were narrowed in hate, the poison of its chakra lapping against Minato's skin. And there was no time. Minato threw one last fleeting glance at the one who was his everything and hugged Naruto tighter to his body. "Goodbye, my love." No matter how desperately Minato wanted to follow Kushina, he knew that she would never forgive him if he just let his son suffer alone. Minato was going to seal himself inside of their baby boy too. He would use his body to trade the Shinigami for taking with it half of the Kyuubi's chakra. His spirit would stay with Naruto. He could then release his spirit and see Kushina again when Naruto grew old enough to take care of himself. He could wait that long. The Yondaime Hokage of Konoha slammed his hands together, his fingers going through a vast amount of intricate designs. He ignored the thunderous roars of the Kyuubi and the choking malevolent chakra that flowed from it like a deadly cloak. He instead focused all his attention on the jutsu he was about to complete. He had to focus if he wanted to do it right. That demon seal. The little old lady who could. 11 months old, Konoha orphanage. Toshi Kimiko wasn't superstitious by any means, but sometimes when she passed by the blue-eyed, blonde-haired angel, she wondered. Kimiko was a little old lady of 70 and had spent most of her life nursing in the Konoha orphanage. She had never been a beauty, but she had been gentle and kind enough to snag a few suitors in her prime. However, she'd never taken the young men up on their offers of marriage and a large house all for themselves because quite frankly, she knew she could never leave the children to themselves. The amount of times the orphanage almost burned down because somebody had left a sweater over the table lamp, or somebody wanted to try cooking when they couldn't even reach the pot, or even when somebody tried to burn their school project to give it an authentic look but really didn't know how to use matches, well. Let's just say that it was more than all the fingers and toes of the nurses present at the orphanage combined. When the younger nurses asked if Kimiko regretted it, she had always laughingly replied no, because what more was there to life than helping the small children that had no one to help them. Besides, she had fallen in love with the place long before any man could have hoped to take her heart. And even now, when by all rights she should have retired and lived a nice quiet life in a home for the old people, she couldn't bring herself to leave the place. And so she stayed on as a nurse, much slower now and no longer able to keep up with the hurling boys, but filled with the same love she had when she was 20. The children were very aware of her too, always carrying her books for her or holding open the door when she passed them. She thought it was the sweetest thing. Every now and again her back would ache and her bones would grind to a halt and she would have to take a day or two off to be in her bed. Those days were painful, but once, a small class from the orphanage had decided to visit her while she were in this state and had sung the dastardliest little song she had ever heard. They had even given her a card. Now whenever she had a bad day, all she would have to do was look at the cutout piece of construction paper with the sloppy crayon signatures of the children and she would feel her pain melt away. She cared equally for all the children, but she had to admit that when the bawling, whisker-cheeked blonde-haired angel was brought in the day after the Kyuubi attack, he had found a special place in her heart. And she knew that he needed a special place from her because he had already gotten enough special places from the others that weren't given the kindest format. 1 hour after the Kyuubi attack, it had been jubilation as everyone learned that the threat was over and that they were alive. 2 hours after the Kyuubi attack, people started to realize that no, not everybody was in fact alive, including their beloved Yondaime, and grief struck Konoha. 3 hours afterwards, and everybody had somehow found out that the Kyuubi was in fact not dead and was actually in the form of a newborn baby. The Sandaime had done a massive speech and had managed to quell the anger for the moment, and although Kimiko didn't understand most of it, what she did understand was that little Naruto was the only thing keeping the Kyuubi from coming back. The very next day, the Sandaime placed little Naruto in the Konoha orphanage, with guards. Kimiko didn't see any of the guards, but she had overheard the Sandaime assuring the orphanage matron that they were there, and Kimiko trusted the Sandaime. Of course, the influx of orphans after the Kyuubi attack was enormous, and Kimiko had found even herself asked to work overtime to accommodate all of them. After the first day that he was brought here, she hadn't been able to see their little savior for 3 months. And what a mistake that was. When she finally found a little time out of her schedule to visit their little savior, she was surprised to find that he'd been sectioned off from the other children. Why is he not with the other babies? She'd asked, not very pleased with this arrangement. Well, it was true that he was their savior, she did not believe that he should be receiving any special treatment. It would only serve to bloat his head. She had raised enough children to see that clearly. The head of the orphanage had simply raised a brow and then uttered the single worst sentence that Kimiko had ever heard. And she had heard a lot in her lifetime. Do you want the others to be corrupted by him? Kimiko had been flabbergasted. Somehow the patron of the orphanage believed that their little savior was somehow the Kyuubi reincarnated, despite the very clear speech the Sandaime had given. Kimiko had pointed this out, but the orphanage head had refused to listen. Keeping that thing is a threat to our safety, the head had said, and I wish you would realize that. The threat's about as relevant as the sea cow, Kimiko had muttered, but it left anyway. She knew she couldn't argue with the one who allowed her in this orphanage in the first place. When Kimiko complained to the others about the patron's unreasonable stance, she'd been surprised to find that she was the one whom they thought was crazy. You're just too kind, Chosi-san, one of the nurses whom Kimiko had thought of like a daughter had said to her, her young blue eyes filled with sympathy. Much too kind. If it weren't so sad for Naruto, it'd have almost been funny. As it was, Kimiko just barely managed to keep in her choked laughter. After that day, she resolved to see their little savior more often. Kimiko was old, and she knew how human nature worked. She knew that she couldn't possibly hope to convince the others that little Naruto was not someone to be wary of. Something like that was beyond her power. What was within her power, however, was the little things that she could do for Naruto. Whenever she had any free time, she would check up on him, holding him despite her frail arms and cooing with him despite her sore throat. Nobody else would do so, after all. The others fed him and they changed his diapers, and Kimiko had to admit that despite their hate and wariness, they did not neglect the baby in any physical way. But they failed to realize that a key component to raising any child was love and attention, something which they were very slow to give. Either that, or they just refused to acknowledge that Naruto was a child like any other. So it was solely up to Kimiko to give their little savior the affection he deserved. And it was in those months that she noticed something very odd about him. She tried her best with him, but even she knew that it was not nearly enough. By all rights he should have been developing much later than the other children, because a baby's development depended mainly on the amount of attention they received, and with a minuscule amount of time Kimiko was actually able to visit little Naruto, he should have been months late in his understanding of the world. He wasn't, however. He was in fact, impossibly ahead of the other children in the orphanage. She wondered at this strange phenomenon and couldn't help the creeping doubt that maybe, just maybe, the others were right about him being the Kyuubi reincarnated, but then she shook her head and dismissed the silly thoughts. After all, it wasn't as if he were forming words or anything yet, which in his 8-month-old state would have been a red flag for unusual. He was simply showing the signs of a particularly brilliant child. She had smiled sadly at that thought, wondering if his chances for a bright future would be ruined by what he enclosed. It was at times like this that Kimiko couldn't help but wonder what the Yondaime was thinking when he decided to ruin a perfectly healthy boy's life. She knew better than the praises everybody sang for their perfect Hokage. Nobody was without flaws, and that was that. Nearly a year after little Naruto had been brought in, the Yondaime made an official visit to the orphanage. Everybody was frantic with decorations, and nurses were doing their best to force the boys into acting on their best behavior. Such a task, unfortunately, was deemed as probable in Uchiha dyeing his hair pink. When the Yondaime did arrive, he smiled kindly and spoke gently, complimenting the homemade ribbons and correctly guessing who had made what. He made all the orphan children feel special, and for that Kimiko was grateful. She had to admit, while nobody was perfect, the Hokages came pretty darn close. It wasn't until after all the children had left that Kimiko had learned the reason behind the Yondaime's visit. With a smile, the ruler of Konoha turned to the patron of the Konoha orphanage and inquired after little Naruto. Kimiko, who had passing through the courtyard at the time, paused. She wasn't an eavesdropper by nature, but if the topic of the conversation should concern anybody it would be her, and thus she slipped behind a small pillar to listen. The patron had reported Naruto's status blandly, which made the Yondaime frown a little, but the robed man did not comment. Kimiko also frowned, noting that the patron had skipped over many aspects of the report, such as the fact that Naruto wasn't getting the mental attention that he needed. Finally, the Yondaime sent the patron on her way and turned to where Kimiko was hiding. "Yes?" the Yondaime asked, a soft smile spreading across his face as his blue eyes searched out her pillar. Kimiko flushed, wondering how he knew she was there, but knowing it was useless to ask. He was a ninja after all, and she was just a civilian. She cleared her throat and walked out from behind her hiding place. Face to face with the ruler of Konoha, she felt her heart skip a beat, but knowing that even the Yondaime wasn't quite as old as her yet gave her confidence. "May we speak privately?" she asked, her voice slightly hesitant. The Yondaime's eyes sharpened, but he nodded in agreement. "I have time," he replied easily. And so, Kimiko began to speak. She quickly explained Naruto's true situation to the Yondaime, whose eyes softened word by word until he gazed upon her as softly as she had seen him look upon their little savior, in private. "Is that so?" the Yondaime said at the end of her explanation, sounding very, very old. "I've had very many people complaining to me about little Naruto, but I had hoped that the orphanage, where the adults voluntarily look after children, well, I suppose it is too much to expect, isn't it? People are grieving, and it is human nature to scapegoat." The next day a law went up that nobody could tell the younger generation about Naruto's Jinchuriki status. "Did you hear that?" she'd said to Naruto as she once again went to visit him after her hours were done. "Now, the other children will treat you normally." Naruto gurgled up happily at her, making her smile back at him gently. She played with him a little while longer, making sure to pet his hair, but not touch his cheeks, because doing so made babies drool, before the dinner time bell rang, and she knew she had to go. "I'll be back," she promised, turning to leave the small room. It was at the very least painted and lit very brightly, so that their little savior wouldn't grow up in the dark. She left the door open as she left, wanting Naruto to hear the sounds of the orphanage in more of an attempt to get him to learn. Perhaps that was how he was so advanced in the first place. At the end of the hallway, Kimiko couldn't help but give one last, final glance back at him. His interest had already shifted, his little face twisted in an expression of concentration as he reached his arms out to the empty air beside him. She smiled lightly and turned away again, walking briskly to the mess hall. She could have sworn she heard him say "Dada." But that was just random baby babble, wasn't it? Tittering tottering. 18 months old, Naruto's room. Ood. No Naruto, that's not food, Minato said worriedly, waving his arms wildly as he watched Naruto chew up the wooden spoon. Naruto was sitting in the center of his own special room, a small metal tray beside him. The caretakers at the orphanage had taken to simply leaving food for Naruto instead of taking the time to feed him as soon as he had learned to eat independently and only collecting the tray later on. Naruto had finished everything on his plate but was still hungry it seemed. Naruto, Minato said yet again from within Naruto's mind, wondering for the 100th time if his baby boy even understood him, that spoon is not something to eat. Put it down. Dada, Naruto complained, finally taking that Shinigami-forsaken spoon out of his mouth. It was dripping with saliva, and even Minato had to stand back a little, impressed at the indenture marks that littered the utensil. It was starting to resemble some of the more hard-worn kunai that he had seen during the wars. Naruto pointed one chubby finger at the spoon which he held in his hands. Ood. Minato let out a sigh. No Naruto, that is not food. Food is something you can swallow, remember? Like that lovely brown lump that we had yesterday. Yes, that was food. But Naruto's attention wasn't even on him anymore. The toddler had plodded over to the right side of the room, no visible wobble in his step as he walked. Naruto's gaze had become riveted on a potted plant sitting on the window ledge, blue eyes wide as if mesmerized. His arm hung limply, the spoon quite forgotten as it dripped off excess drool. And there was quite a lot of excess drool. Minato ran a hand down his face. Sometimes he wondered why he even bothered. Though of course, initially he had not bothered. The first of the 3 months he had been inside Naruto, he had done nothing but grieve for Kushina. After the initial getting over of his patheticness, he had started to pay attention to the outside world. He was still waiting until the time that he could be with her, but he knew that mourning aimlessly would not make the time pass faster than doing something productive, such as raising her son. Everything he saw was from Naruto's perspective, but his adult mind was able to comprehend much more than Naruto's developing brain could. He was saddened and dismayed at the treatment Naruto received, but if he were honest with himself, not overly surprised or even mad. He knew human nature well and had always known in the back of his mind that something like this would happen. The sound of shuffling feet alerted Minato that somebody else had entered Naruto's room, but Minato's sight was Naruto's sight and it was currently full of potted plant. Naruto didn't notice the intrusion, so he didn't turn around and let Minato see who it was. Of course, Minato already knew who it was even without seeing the person, but still, it would have been nice to turn around and see. Once again Minato thought about tampering with the seal from the inside, but in the end his good sense won out. He wished that he had some more time to develop the seal before he inputted his chakra and forced his spirit inside his son, but the fact was that he did not have that time when the Kyuubi was almost among them. As much as he loved his son, it did get a bit tedious at times listening to baby babble with nothing else to do. And now, with all the time in the world, Minato could not touch the seal for fear of accidentally tampering with the restrictions around the Kyuubi. He had never read or done anything from within a person before and he did not want to risk it. Naruto's attention finally shifted from the potted plant. He looked around, raising his arms in happiness as he spotted the one who had entered. It was one of the nurses. Somehow ignoring Naruto's utter devastating cuteness, the nurse jerked the wooden spoon from Naruto's hands and went over to pick up his tray. Minato frowned a little at the treatment, despite the fact that something like this happened every day, he was still surprised by it. "You're not a child," the nurse muttered, "stop acting like one." But that is her closing statement, the nurse hurried away, locking the door behind her. Naruto's hands dropped back to his sides, his head dropping. Despite the fact that he couldn't have really understood the words, Minato knew that Naruto picked up on the fact that he was unwanted. Hey, it's alright, Minato soothed, once again wishing that he could pat Naruto's shoulder or pull Kushina's boy into an all-encompassing hug that would just make him forget about all the stupid proceedings around him. But he could not, so all he could use were words. "I'm here Naru-chan, I'm still here." Naruto instantly brightened, forgetting his other encounter in the light of the recent one, as babies were wont to do. "Dada." "Yes," Minato laughed, "it's Dada." "Dada?" Naruto beamed, showing off all of his little teeth. Although Minato couldn't see Naruto, he did manage to catch Naruto's reflection in the window, which was how he knew what Naruto was doing. He chuckled. "You're getting a fine set of molars, Naru-chan," Minato teased, "those are the signs of a strong boy. You are a strong boy, aren't you?" Teething had been a nightmare, especially since nobody had really bothered to help Naruto get through the pain, but Naruto had gotten through the stage somehow. "Dada?" Naruto exclaimed again, not really understanding Minato's words. And then, quite abruptly, Naruto sat down, a serious expression on his face. "Twink. Brink." Minato repeated, blinking, wondering how Naruto was suddenly thirsty after all that potato and apple juice. And then, he realized what Naruto was about to do. "Oh Naru-chan, you have to first find a toy." But his warning came too late. Wink. Dwink. Naruto giggled happily, slapping yellow puddle that had formed. Stuff splashed everywhere, and for once Minato was glad that he didn't have a physical form. Minato could only smile weakly, not sure what else he could do. No Naruto, that's not called a drink, although it does look very similar. They weren't in the best of circumstances so far, no, but they were surviving, somehow. Silent vigil. 2 years old, Hokage's office. The Sandaime sat back on his chair, taking a breath as he took a quick break from the monstrous mountain of paperwork that had been threatening to consume his desk. Sarutobi Hiruzen could only shake his head as he thought back to exactly how much paperwork he had received earlier that day. He had been forced to arrange it all in a pattern not unlike the Hokage family hairstyle in order to get it all to fit on the table. Idly he played with his pen, wondering if there was some way to push all of the blasted work onto someone else. Surely his predecessors had found a way to do it. Then again, they were a little bit stuffy, and he wouldn't have put it past the Nidaime at least to have actually enjoyed doing this stuff. A small smile flittered across Hiruzen's face at the thought of the Nidaime. Now there was a man who certainly knew what he was doing. What he wouldn't give to have the Nidaime back again. The past 2 years had been hard on him. Even before the Yondaime was selected, Hiruzen knew he had been losing his touch, but it wasn't really until Minato's death that Hiruzen truly started feeling his age. Previously, he'd been able to ignore it because he had known no other way of life, but when Minato took office, Hiruzen had finally the chance to relax. He finally understood that he was not in top condition any longer, and Minato's efficiency in taking care of the village showed him that he had been in fact failing to keep up with the times. At first it had actually made Hiruzen feel a little offended because a youngster barely out of school had been so much better at doing everything than he was. It also made no small sting to his pride that his favorite for the Hokage position Orochimaru had turned out to be such a debacle. Those subtle feelings lasted until the first 2 weeks of Yondaimehood had passed and Hiruzen had realized that there was no one more suited to the position. Just barely a year after that, the Kyuubi attacked. Hiruzen sighed and put down his pen. That was when all the troubles started, really. While on the surface it was not so much of a change between his pre-Yondaime days, there was now and forever would be a marked difference. For one, Hiruzen now knew that his days as Sandaime should be over, but there was no other suitable replacement, and that made things so much worse. For another, the village was different. Normally civilians did not take much notice of what their ninja counterpart did, but even they knew of the loss of their beloved Yondaime. He had been widely popular and in his prime when he died, so nobody really remembered whatever flaws he might have had. It did not help that he went down in a blaze of glory during the battle with the Kyuubi. Hiruzen was old, but he was far from senile. He heard the whispers when his back was turned, and the villagers clearly preferred the young and godlike Minato. Of course, they all had kind thoughts about the Sandaime, but the spark that had been there when Minato had ruled was now gone. There was a kind of morale that had disappeared with the Yondaime's death, and Hiruzen was not sure he could contain the leaks made from that. What's worse, whatever remained of that spark seemed to have reorganized itself into anger. Hiruzen had seen a horrifying metamorphosis of admiration and esteem become rage and hatred towards the very thing the Yondaime sought to protect. He was of course thinking about Naruto. A year ago he had put up a law due to a very kind old woman's intuition. Sadly, that old woman now was confined to her bed and could not get up any longer. Still, it was her words that helped Hiruzen to see the depths of the village. He could only hope that things would change in the future as heated emotions died down and slowly rage faded into painless memory. Perhaps even now the village had forgotten who Naruto was and would be willing to accept him again. Hiruzen frowned a little at the thought, noticing something wrong with it. Well, it was true that he hadn't been keeping tabs on Naruto because he didn't want to show too much favoritism. Would Minato be mad that Hiruzen knew so little in regards to his son? Sure, Hiruzen knew that Naruto was developing normally and that nobody outside was going to plan a high-depth assassination plan anytime soon, but was that enough? Wouldn't Minato have wanted him to know more than that? The Sandaime Hokage shifted guiltily. The truth was, he had no time, what with village reconstruction and the budding problem of the Uchihas. But that had been his exact excuse when he was bringing up Asuma, and look how well that turned out. Of course, Asuma was still an invaluable shinobi, but Hiruzen still felt twinges of pain at the fact that relations between them were strained at best and that they would never be the ideal father and son combo. Hiruzen was not Naruto's father of course, but Naruto's father was unavailable at the moment. It was true that it would be a little special treatment since no orphan had a father, but Hiruzen thought that the Yondaime's son might deserve that much. He would go visit Naruto then and see how the child was growing up. Nodding to himself, Hiruzen stood, fluid in his motion. He went for the door. At the entrance he paused and looked back bemusedly at his unoccupied desk, wondering how mocking grief about paperwork had turned into an inner soliloquy about the hardships of life. Shaking his head at the intricacies of the human mind, thought his student Tsunade might have known something about that. Hiruzen quietly shut the door behind him and exited his office. He hummed a charming tune as he walked down the streets, nodding to various people as he passed them. Civilian and young ninja alike waved to him enthusiastically, and Hiruzen could not help but smile back. Now there were some people who were not kind simply because they wanted something from him. They were not like the blasted squabbling war veterans who aimed to change Konoha to their will and would not listen to reason as Hiruzen presented it. This was the village he was trying to protect. The stroll took far less time than he would have liked, and soon Hiruzen was once again in front of the large silver gates, the Konoha orphanage. Well, the gates used to be silver, anyhow. They were full of tarnish now, and it was hard to distinguish them from iron, but Hiruzen had been here when the orphanage had first been built, and he remembered how it had looked them. Shaking such thoughts out of his head, they did make him sound very old, didn't they? Hiruzen quietly entered the compound, making sure not to disturb anyone. He wanted this to be a surprise visit after all. He himself was very surprised to be visiting. There were children playing outside, but he did not allow them to see him. He knew that if he were swamped, he would not have the heart to deny them some of his time. So, Hiruzen stuck to the shadows. It only took him a few moments to find Naruto's room. The Lady Chosi had shown it to him the few times he had come, and although the last visit had been months ago, Hiruzen was not declared to have eidetic memory for nothing. He opened the door to Naruto sitting in the middle of the room with his side facing the entrance, a tower of blocks before him. Naruto seemed so intent on what he was doing that he didn't notice Hiruzen's entrance. The Tsunade bit back a grin. Gently closing the door behind him, Hiruzen knelt beside Naruto, causing the boy's eyes to finally flicker up from the blocks. And then, blue orbs widened in realization, and Naruto let out a happy gurgle, reaching chubby arms up for a hug. Gigi. Hiruzen chuckled and obliged the boy. When he pulled back, he patted the boy's head and took a moment to access the small tower that the boy had made. It was surprisingly intricate, much better than anything Hiruzen remembered Asuma building. Then again, Asuma had never been a particularly active boy on that part. Nebulf. Naruto said proudly, seeming to have guessed some of the Hokage's intentions and jumping right into answering the unspoken question. The blonde was pointing one stubby thumb towards his chest, his other fingers curled into a fist. His chest was puffed up, and he might have almost looked manly if it weren't for the fact that he was so undeniably cute. The Tsunade's eyes crinkled. Ah yes. So you are. Maybe you'll even become a great architect one day and build a monument that people from all the elemental countries will go to and praise. For just the fewest of moments, Naruto's little face scrunched up in confusion, but just as the Tsunade was about to open his mouth to explain what he meant, suddenly, the blonde-haired boy's face cleared. Yay, me Bulther. The 2-year-old exclaimed excitedly, jumping up and consequently, knocking over his tower. His face plummeted. Aw shucks. Hiruzen had to just barely bite back a laugh. Life was never dull with Naruto around. He wondered where Naruto had learned some of the gestures and phrases, and Chosi-san had made it clear that he didn't really have much interaction with others, but Hiruzen did have to admit that it made for some entertainment. Despite himself, Hiruzen felt pride for the little ball of energy. Naruto was a bright child, just like his father. It really was a shame that the village could not see that yet. They're the ones missing out, Hiruzen muttered softly, which caused Naruto to throw a confused glance in his direction. Hiruzen shook his head and decided to change the subject. So Naruto, I noticed that the blocks are a new addition to this place. Naruto's confusion instantly cleared, as was wont of a toddler. He nodded enthusiastically, obviously happy to share his story, and pointed to the blocks imperiously. Maiko gift. Hiruzen made an ah of understanding. Slowly but surely, Naruto's room had been filling with things from Chosi Kimiko-san. It really was unfortunate that Chosi-san had taken ill now and could no longer provide for him. The Hokage of Konoha smiled a little sadly at that thought and reached out a hand to smooth the edges of Naruto's hair. The little child leaned into the touch, savoring it, which only made Hiruzen feel sadder. Would you like some more toys, Naru-chan? He felt as if he were pawing off time for money, which really shouldn't have been described as a feeling, because that was exactly what he was doing. However, he was Hokage, and he couldn't spare time to take care of Naruto, no matter how much he wanted to. After all, he hadn't even been able to look after his own son and daughter. Besides, if he spent a disproportionate amount of time with Naruto, people might start to wonder. The villagers would probably figure that it was because Naruto was the Jinchuriki of Konoha, but the other villages didn't know that, and Hiruzen was afraid that they would assume the worst. Although Naruto could as of now reasonably pass as the child of any blonde, blue-haired parent in Fire Country, Hiruzen knew it was only a matter of time before people started seeing the resemblances and wondering. It was best to keep Naruto under the radar until people started forgetting about their Yondaime Hokage, no matter how much it tugged at Hiruzen's heartstrings to let it be so. Still, if people recognized Naruto as the son of the Yellow Flash, there would be trouble. Hiruzen did not have confidence to capture every assassin that would be sent due to Naruto's paternity. Jinchuriki were usually left alone as a national affair, but if the other villages knew that the strongest of the demons were combined with the blood of the fourth, even Hiruzen could not predict the outcome. "Want swords?" Naruto suddenly said, snapping Hiruzen out of his thoughts. Hiruzen blinked, not entirely sure what had just been requested of him. Naruto pulled away, hopping around and going through some rather impressive fencing motions. Or rather, they would have been impressive if he didn't look like he was about to trip at any moment. "Swerves. Fight wagons. Rescue princess." Hiruzen let out a laugh as Naruto's intentions finally became clear to him. "You want to rescue a princess, why am I not surprised? It's what fights do." Naruto sounded indignant. "And how would you know that?" Hiruzen asked in amusement. "The booth saith." Naruto cried out, looking frustrated as he waved his imaginary sword in what might have been meant to come off as a threatening gesture. As it was, Hiruzen just knew his daughter would have wanted to take pictures. "Dada told me." The Sandaime had just been about to open his mouth to tell Naruto that he shouldn't believe everything he read in books when he felt the first warning bells go off in his head. "Dada?" he repeated, alarmed. All his previous jubilation disappeared in the face of the new threat. Naruto opened his mouth and then closed it. His face screwed up and Hiruzen felt his heart do a flip-flop. He recognized that expression. It was one that people had when they were holding an inward conversation with themselves or someone who was in their head. The Hokage felt his gut clench. If the Kyuubi had gotten access to Naruto already, then the villagers would be right and Hiruzen might not be able to do anything to save the little boy. "No data?" Naruto asked, sounding confused, before brightening and bobbing his head up and down in fierce agreement with himself. He made a stance and then crossed his arms in front of him in a big X, "No data." And then, he giggled, ruining the effect. Hiruzen could practically hear his heartbeat in his chest now. Someone was obviously instructing Naruto to lie. "Could I look at your stomach, Naru-chan?" Hiruzen asked gently, sure that the Kyuubi would tell Naruto to refuse. If it came to that, then Hiruzen would have no qualms about knocking the child out. If there was one good thing about his level of skill, it was that Naruto wouldn't even feel a thing. "Doctor?" Naruto exclaimed in an ear-splitting yell, hurrying to lift his shirt. He still didn't have complete control of his motor skills it seemed however, because quite suddenly, Naruto went tumbling backwards, his own movement causing him to lose balance. The Sandaime caught him before his head hit the ground and noted dryly that somehow Naruto had gotten the shirt wrapped around his head, exposing his stomach but at the same time, completely covering his face. He gently tugged the shirt off Naruto's head, noting that Naruto was still giggling rather adamantly. There was no doubt that the little blonde thought this was all great fun. Hiruzen pressed a finger to Naruto's stomach and pushed some of his chakra across the skin. Naruto started squirming in his grip, letting out a sporadic giggle. Hiruzen knew it must have tickled, but he urged the boy to go along with it for a few moments later. Finally, the seal appeared, spreading out like spillway ink from the center of Naruto's belly. The Sandaime's eyebrows furrowed as he examined the seal. No matter how he looked at it, he could find no mistake. It was doing exactly as it was supposed to, and it was not coming loose in any way. And then, he spotted it. Hiruzen sucked in a breath as his mind brought forth the type of sealing that the array most resembled, and quite suddenly, he saw what Minato must have done. It was slightly dangerous, but there could be benefits to it as well, and besides, the seal was some revised version that probably did more than Hiruzen knew that it did. After all, it was Minato that was the seal's genius, and although Hiruzen was a master himself, he acknowledged that the Yondaime had gone beyond mastering the art. It seemed as if Minato had given something of himself and Kushina to little Naruto. It looked like nothing serious, probably just a few memories or something, but enough for Naruto to know that he was loved. It was probably too confusing for poor little Naruto right now, which was why he thought that he had talked to Dada, when in reality all he was seeing was memories, but Hiruzen knew it was also probably the only thing that was keeping Naruto going right now. If there was something that Hiruzen could do to change the people's opinions, he would do it within a heartbeat, but unfortunately his power did not extend to the depths of people's thoughts. "That's that, Naruto," Hiruzen said softly, letting go of the wriggling blonde. Naruto instantly jumped away, running after something on the other side of the room. It seemed that during Hiruzen's examination, Naruto's attention had been diverted yet again, and even a visitor's prescience couldn't keep that bundle of energy still. Hiruzen smiled as he brushed off his robes and stood. He knew he had overextended his stay here and that he needed to go back to his office. He wasn't worried this time, however. Naruto, he felt, would do just fine. Escape from prison. And 2 months, Naruto's room. Naruto was staring at the door. Minato was getting increasingly worried. Despite dwelling in his son's head, Minato very rarely knew what Naruto was thinking of in any one instance. Yes, sometimes he could follow his son's thought process, but the truth of the matter was, there just wasn't much thought process to a 2-year-old. Naruto was not a silent or still baby by any means, always preferring to badger Minato for a story or to play with his toys. That wasn't to say that Naruto couldn't be still, but when that happened, it was usually related to a brilliant idea that Minato would definitely have stopped if he had a physical body. As it was, he had been forced to watch Naruto almost kill himself at least 12 times, despite the fact that he was nearly always in a room that he should have known inside out by now. Some time ago, Naruto had been quite willing to listen to anything that Minato said, but Minato must have said the word no one too many times, because Naruto had taken to that idea like a fish in water, no pun intended for his name. Now, Naruto couldn't seem to get enough of shouting the word no at the top of his lungs and then promptly diving off into another dangerous stunt. And the worst part of it was, Minato had no physical body to do anything about it. And that brought Minato back to the present, worrying over what new idea his son had come up with and what it would do to him. And then, Naruto nodded to himself and took a step towards the door. Minato felt his heart flutter at the sudden movement. What was Naruto going to do? Was he going to attempt to set the room on fire again in an effort to become a dragon, or destroy the window trying to throw his blocks like kunai, or, oh kami no, try planking again? But all Naruto did was walk up to the door, lifting an arm and resting the palm of his hand against the cool wood. And then, he pushed. Nothing happened. Naruto's face gained a frustrated expression as he pushed again, shoving all his weight into it. Minato blinked in surprise, having expected something much more hazardous, but it looked as if all his boy wanted to do was to open the door. He admitted that it had been a long time since Naruto had stepped out of his room. Kimiko-sen had taken them out before, but she had not come to visit for 6 months now, and Minato would not be surprised if Naruto had forgotten about those cases already. The toddler's memories were short, and it was already quite an achievement from Naruto not to have forgotten about Kimiko-sen completely. As it was, Minato knew that the only time he really thought of her was when the Sandaime came over with new gifts, and Naruto wondered why his Miko-sen did not give him anything anymore. Naruto was still pushing at the door, his face gaining an unpleasant shade of red. His voice was loud, shrill in his desire, out. Minato chuckled. Now that he had determined that going outside might not be a bad thing, he decided to help Naruto with this. "Naru-chan," he said, pausing a moment as he waited for Naruto to stop pushing and listen to him. Eventually, his boy did stop, panting heavily as he leaned against the door. "Naru-chan, that isn't the way to open a door. Tell me, how did you know that the door led to the outside anyway?" Naruto blinked, taking a step away from the door and pointing one stubby finger towards his crayons, which the Sandaime had gotten him just 2 weeks ago. And then, he pointed towards the door. "Gramps go. Nurse go." "You're so smart, Naruto," Minato couldn't help but coo, before calming down a little. "You're right, of course. That is where our Gramps and the nurses come and go. But think back, did they do anything special to get in and out of this room? Did they do anything to the door besides push it?" Little Naruto's face screwed up in concentration, but Minato was sure that he would get it. Sure enough, it was only a moment later that Naruto's face lit up, and Minato didn't have to be able to read his mind to know that Naruto remembered. "Doorknob." Minato beamed. "Yes, Naruto, it's the doorknob. You have to turn it, remember? Alright, now try again." Happily, Naruto obliged, and this time he opened the door in one try. Naruto let out a whoop of joy, giving a quick dance daddy before racing off into the corridors. Racing, of course, was a relative term. Naruto wasn't quite good enough on his feet to run yet, so he only walked as fast as he could. When he turned the corner, he made a step that was a little too big for his center of gravity to catch up to, and Naruto went tumbling to the floor. Minato had a little heart attack. "Are you alright, Naru-chan?" "Oh," Naruto bemoaned, but pushed himself to his feet anyway. It looked as if he were determined to not let a little bruise ruin his day. For a great deal of time they simply wandered around, lost. While Minato had memorized the routes when the Sandaime or Kimiko-sen had taken Naruto out, he did not know the layout of the whole orphanage. Naruto had gone the other way initially, into area that had remained uncharted for Minato. Thankfully, Naruto didn't seem to mind that he had no idea where he was going. That was the point of an adventure, after all. He was getting more and more excited with every step, babbling things to Minato that had started to sound nonsensical because he was talking so fast. Minato only laughed and settled back in Naruto's mind, listening to his kid fondly. Soon though, Minato noticed that Naruto started to tire. It took him a moment to realize why. Naruto was not used to walking for long periods of time, and his long exploration had begun to wear him out. "Neri-chan," Minato spoke up, his voice gentle, "I think that maybe it's time to go back now." But Naruto was having none of that. He plodded on resolutely ahead, "No. Come on Naruto," Minato coaxed, "you could always do this another day too. It's not the end of the world if we go back for today. We can come back next time." Naruto didn't even appear to have heard him, "No. Naruto," Minato sighed. He might have argued more, but he recognized bullheadedness when he saw it. Naruto was too much like Kushina to have Minato push him around. The thought of Kushina sent a stab of pain through his chest, but he consoled himself that it wouldn't be too long. Besides, what he was doing here was honoring her memory. With Neri-chan's stubbornness, there could be no doubt that he was her son. And then, quite suddenly, Naruto came to a stop. He turned, almost toppling over as he did so, and pointed a chubby finger in the opposite direction to which he had been walking. "Dada, me back." The elder blinked at the sudden turn of events, and then a light smile spread across his face. Stubborn as he was, it looked as if Neri-chan could see reason too. "Alright Naruto, don't worry, I know where to go. I win, you lose." And 5 months, Konoha Orphanage Courtyard. They had made 8 trips outside of Naruto's room after the first one, but this was the first time that they had made it to this place. It took Minato only a moment to recognize it as the orphanage courtyard, where the children were often shoot out to play. He had only been here a few times to visit as the Hokage, but he still remembered it well. Open archways surrounded a large square field, and to the side of the field was a small playground with a slide, 2 swing sets, and 1 big sandbox. There were, Minato noted, quite a lot of children playing in the orphanage courtyard. It seemed that Naruto noticed too, because in the next instant the blonde had paused by the doorway, looking hesitant as large blue eyes swept the grassy field. Minato cocked his head, wondering what had gotten the normally expressive child so quiet, when suddenly he remembered all the books that Kushina had made him read about childhood development. He chuckled, a bit sadly, when he remembered the face she had made at him as she was explaining how boring those books were, and that she fully expected him to be there to tell her every little thing that she needed to do so that she wouldn't have to read them. His chest felt tight as he thought of her. He doubted he would ever stop thinking about her. "It's alright, Naruto," Minato urged gently, drawing on his years-old knowledge. Toddlers needed a little pushing in order for them to interact with people they had not gotten used to during their infant years. "Go on. It'll be fun." And just like the book predicted, that was all the encouragement Naruto needed. The blonde nodded once and bounded over to a gaggle of children who were playing in the sandbox. They were all around his age, and their overseer had fallen asleep on a nearby bench. Naruto plopped himself down next to a boy with dark hair and murky brown eyes. The boy glanced over, looking distrustful. "Introduce yourself, Neri-chan," Minato said, sending an image of a person holding out their hand as they waited for their companion's reply. Minato had discovered that he could send images into Naruto's mind not too long ago. That was mainly due to the fact that Naruto had only begun to understand what was happening and speak clearly about it not too long ago. It was with a guilty feeling that Minato realized that he had probably been doing so before, but had not distinguished between thinking his own thoughts and sending them directly into Neri-chan's mind. After he had found out what he could do however, Minato had made sure to test what constituted as a thought that Naruto would see too, and by now he had gotten a good grasp of the art. It immensely helped both Naruto's development. While Minato could not be physically there for Naruto, at least he could show Naruto what he needed to do. Plus, it made bedtime stories that much more interesting. Naruto, for once, did not argue Minato's suggestion. Usually he would be sure to make a few complaints before following through, but Minato thought that just maybe Naruto was too nervous to do that this time. The blonde stuck out his hand. "Hi. Miruto." The dark-haired boy blinked, looking confused, before he pointed a thumb at himself and beamed with pride. "Me Shiori." In his excitement at making a new friend, Naruto didn't even notice that Shiori was supposed to have taken his hand and shake. Then again, Naruto didn't even know the meaning of a handshake yet, and Minato realized that the newly introduced Shiori probably didn't either. He chuckled to himself. "Whoops. Wanna play?" Naruto asked excitedly, allowing his arm to fall back to his side as he bounced around excitedly. Shiori nodded enthusiastically, but then seemed to pause a moment and thought, "Play what?" "No fall." Shiori blinked, "Huh?" Minato blinked, "Huh?" Naruto gave his new friend the toothiest grin imaginable. "Dada teached me." Minato couldn't help but feel a slight flutter in his chest at Naruto's words and what they implied. Oh, he knew Naruto had to listen to him, but it still made him feel special to hear his little boy confirm it with his own words. Still, he also knew that he shouldn't encourage the habit. Naruto was an orphan in the eyes of the world, and if he constantly talked about his dada, people would start getting suspicious. A month ago, the Sandaime had nearly found out, and that thought sent Minato's heart racing. Well, he wouldn't have minded his predecessor figuring out that Minato was residing within Naruto's mind, as Minato did have much to tell the Hokage. The blonde also realized that it was not the time. Naruto had not developed enough to articulate well what Minato needed him to say, and he knew that there was a very real chance of him being mistaken for the Kyuubi if he did not make it explicitly clear that he was intended to be there. There was much to tell the Sandaime, but that, also, could wait. When Naruto gained more vocabulary, then Minato would begin thinking of a way to warn the Sandaime adequately. For now, Minato made a vague note to himself to speak about that habit with Naruto later. "I done get it," Shiori admitted, who, not unlike Minato, was not following Naruto's thought process very well. Naruto pointed to the sand, "See? No touch." Minato made a noise of understanding as he finally saw where Naruto was going with this. He couldn't help but chuckle slightly and maybe even feel a bit flattered. And then, Naruto pointed to the assortment of plastic buckets and shovels that were lying around untouched land. Done with his explanation, Naruto turned and grinned at Shiori, "Race." Minato had invented a game with Naruto to play when the blonde got too bored with his toys. Well, actually, Minato had invented many games, but it seemed as if Naruto had picked this one to share with his new friend. The rules were simple. The floor was the sea, and everything else was land. The goal was to get across the room without falling into the sea. The previous Hokage had invented it in order for Naruto to have fun, but there was a tiny voice in the back of his head that niggled at him about how great the game was for developing balance and spatial awareness. Minato resolutely ignored that voice. While he knew that Naruto would eventually have to begin ninja training so that he could cope with moderate, it didn't mean that it had to begin right now. Minato wanted his boy to have his childhood first. Shiori's face was scrunched up in confusion as he tried and failed to understand. Finally, he shook his head in frustration. "No look fun. Me play sandcastle." Naruto gasped, and then his face too scrunched up, although it wasn't in confusion. Sending an impending storm, and was that the crack of lightning he heard in the distance. Minato hurried to intervene. "Wait, Naru-chan, Shiori-kun here probably just doesn't understand how this game really works, which is why he doesn't want to play it. Your explanation was great, but I think he needs a demonstration too, just like the one I gave you. How about you show him first?" The clouds on Naruto's face instantly cleared. "Okay." Naruto chirped and hopped over to the start line. Shiori frowned, but Naruto ignored him this time. The smaller blonde took a deep breath and began hopping. He wobbled as he landed on the first plastic mold, and Minato had to wince slightly at the small crack that came from the toy. The game wasn't the best one to play without appropriate materials, but Minato couldn't very well take his permission back now that the game had started. Naru-chan needed the confidence, and Minato was not going to take that away, even if it did involve breaking a few things. Naruto's arms cartwheeled, but he finally managed to bring himself back into balance. He was standing on one foot, the other a few millimeters from the ground. Shiori watched wide-eyed. And then, Naruto sprung again, landing on the next plaything, and then the next and the next. Finally, he made it to the other end of the sandbox and stood triumphantly, grinning at Shiori. By this time, it was not only Shiori who had taken notice of Naruto. All the children were chattering excitedly, pointing at Naruto and his course. Soon, it was revealed that they wanted to try too, and Naruto was more than happy to oblige. "Race. Race." Naruto squealed, shooting back towards the start line. The others quickly followed, not wanting to be left out. Finally, they were all lined up on one end of the sandbox. One of the older kids decided to put himself down as the referee, probably because he was one of the only ones who could really count. "Alright guys. 3, 2, 1, go." There was a yell of excitement, and then things just went downhill. There were too many at once, and more kids drowned than landed on land. The children were pushing and shoving at each other, all intent on winning the race first. Minato felt a flare of worry. "Naru-chan, maybe we shouldn't be playing this right now. You could get hurt." The game itself was one that had the danger of pain, but Naruto had played it so many times that Minato was hardly ever worried now about him falling. However, Naruto had never played it with other children before, some of which who were older than him. Minato was worried that he would get shoved, and a fall in the sandbox couldn't be fun. Naruto, however, ignored him, just like he had always been doing recently when the situation didn't suit him. A lot of children fell and began crying, although Minato dryly noted that they were more shocked than in any actual pain. In some ways, children could be more devious than his best jonin. But it seemed like all the other toddlers understood the trick because none of them paid any attention to the fallen ones. "Haha," Naruto shrieked in excitement, shoving just as eagerly as the others. Unfortunately, all this noise woke their overseer up. Minato noticed out of the corner of Naruto's eye much too late, but even if he noticed it earlier, it wasn't as if he could have done anything. Naruto was too caught up with his new friends to listen to his father. The nurse stirred, blinking one eye open and squinting as she adjusted to the sun. And then, her gaze landed on the sandbox, and suddenly she no longer seemed sleepy. "What is going on here?" she shrieked, standing up in one hurried motion as she took a step towards the playground. Her eyes swept the area, taking in the scattered remnants of the crying orphans and the sight of the bigger toddlers, looking as if they were engaged in a fight. Her face turned a bright red. The children engaged in the game of no fall froze. The woman put her hands on her hips, her eyes narrowing dangerously. All the children straightened, and Minato suddenly got the feeling that they knew her very, very well. Or, they knew what she was like mad. "Well. We play game," the boy who had counted down earlier said hurriedly. Thankfully, toddlers had no concept of tattling at the moment because no one gave him harsh glares. Instead, they were all staring at their feet guiltily. The boy pointed at Naruto. "He taught us." Unfortunately for the boy, Minato did have a very acute concept of tattling. He closed his eyes and told himself that it was only a toddler and it would be beyond ridiculous to get mad at a 3-year-old. It wasn't working very well. Inwardly, Minato mused on how Kakashi might react if his mellow sensei stringed up some poor 3-year-old by the ankles and left him hanging there. Kakashi might even drop his mask in shock. That got him to chuckle and to wonder where Kakashi was right now, but then the nurse began speaking again and Minato had to file the thought for later. "Oh really?" the nurse began, her voice sickly sweet. She turned to the blonde boy, the anger rolling off in waves. And then, she suddenly seemed to spot something and her eyes flashed in recognition. The anger cooled, the tension leaving her body. When she spoke, her voice was as cold as the early frost. "Ah, I see." Naruto, who had opened her mouth to say something, suddenly paused, shifting uncomfortably. Minato frowned sadly as the woman seemed to have recognized Naruto, once again not for whom he was, but for what he was. Naruto never did seem to do well around those people. "I'm not sure who took you out of your room, brat," the woman continued, the tone of her voice making even the other children shiver, "but you will not cause any more trouble here, understand?" Naruto bit his lip and looked down. Minato sighed and sent an image of him ruffling Naruto's hair to the boy. Naruto didn't respond. Even after all this time, Naruto didn't know how to deal with the nurses. He had once tried to throw a temper tantrum with them as he had often done with Minato, but unlike Minato who at least tried to calm him, the nurses simply left. Sometimes they even gave Naruto a few choice words as a parting gift. While Naruto did not know what most of the words meant, he understood the tone easily enough. Naruto was an exuberant boy, but Minato was sometimes reminded very harshly that his Naru-chan was still very much a fragile child. "Naru-chan, let's go," Minato said gently. "I'll teach you a new game, alright?" For the first time in a long time, Naruto didn't argue. Paper match family. And 8 months, Naruto's room. Blue eyes were narrowed in concentration. His lips were pulled into a frown as he observed a piece of art, eyebrows drawn in contemplation. And then, Naruto shook his head and threw what he had just made across the room. It hit the wall with a faint plop and slid down messily onto the tiled floors, leaving a trail of sticky white glue behind it. "Ah, Naru-chan," Minato said with some strain in his voice, casting his eyes around desperately. The room was beginning to resemble a mini paper shredder, with all the stray pieces of it scattered around the room, and the glue was not going to come off the wall unless they did something about it right away. "You need to calm down a little. I know it's probably not what you envisioned, but I thought it was a lovely piece of artwork." Naruto's lips jutted out as he slapped the ground in front of him. It was covered with glue, no good. Daddy no like. Minato sighed. It seemed as if he wasn't allowed to like the previous crafts that Naruto had made. They had snuck out of Naruto's room again with the intent of exploring, or something like that. Minato had by now memorized the whole layout of the orphanage, and he couldn't say that going out now was as exciting as the first few times they had done it. Still, Naruto hadn't seemed to have tired of it yet, which was a good thing all things considered, especially since Naruto wasn't allowed to play with the other children. They had come across an open door, one that held a variety of children ages 3 to 5 within. They had been sitting behind long wooden tables, chattering elatedly and just generally having fun. On the tables were an assortment of colored paper and glue, and one look at the children made it obvious as to what they were doing. The orphanage had arranged for the children to make some crafts, which was something the younger children obviously enjoyed immensely. Naruto had not been invited. The look on Naruto's face had made Minato make a decision he was sure he wouldn't have made 3 years ago. "Hey Naru-chan," Minato had said, "why don't we make some crafts too? Don't worry, we can do it in your room, but here's what we need to do." They had waited until the caretaker had left for a quick bathroom break, and then Naruto had hurried in and taken as much paper and glue as his little arms could carry. The other children had seen him, but Minato doubted that the nurses would do much about it, even if they said anything. The nurses seemed to want to avoid Naruto more than anything else, and he was highly doubtful that there would be a confrontation. After all, Naruto making a few paper dolls could hardly harm anyone. They had come back to Naruto's room after that, just as Minato had promised. Thankfully, Naruto didn't seem to dwell on the bad things, or maybe that was just because he was young still, but by the time they had gotten back Naruto seemed to have completely forgotten about where he got the craft supplies and simply cared about the fact that he had them. And then he started trying his best to make things, just as he had seen the other children do. Needless to say, he hadn't been very successful. If Minato were to be honest, Naruto's people, or animals, or houses, did seem to resemble colored blobs that were oozing with excess glue. Minato had tried to give some instruction, but he wasn't very good at this type of thing himself, and Naruto might have even gotten more confused. At least Naruto hadn't thrown a temper tantrum yet. Minato was getting a headache even thinking about how much of a disaster that would be with Naruto's new materials. Naruto thought aloud, stroking his chin. His hands, still covered with glue from the floor, spread the sticky white material all across his face. Minato winced. It was going to be a nightmare washing that out, especially when the nurses were none too gentle in giving the little blonde his baths. As time grew, Minato found himself becoming more and more frustrated with Naruto's treatment. He wasn't sure why that was. It had not changed a widget from when Naruto had first been placed in the orphanage. Perhaps Minato was just irate about the fact that nobody could see what a little angel his baby was, despite the fact that Naruto had already been with them for nearly 3 years. Perhaps it was because he had nothing else to really occupy himself with outside of being mad. It did not bode well. Minato had very rarely gotten angry during his lifetime, and he did not understand what changed. Had death really been so hard on him? Or maybe, he thought hesitantly, or maybe it was simply the fact that I'm really missing Kushina. That explanation didn't quite seem to fit though. It wasn't that he didn't understand the nurse's plight. If it were not his own son who was Naruto, and if not for the fact that it was he who had doomed the boy to such a fate, Minato might have even taken a similar stance. He personally knew that he would wish to avoid the painful reminder of his losses every day. After all, the people were not blinded. They could be stupid, yes, but they were not blind. Minato knew for a fact that at least 90% of Konoha knew that little Naruto couldn't possibly be the Kyuubi reincarnate, but they simply chose to ignore that fact, unable to have someone to push their own pain towards. Minato understood that. So why was it so hard nowadays to keep that calming outlook? It was all so muddled. Kushina was supposed to be the one who got angry and emotional. Minato was meant to be the one to calm everybody down and cheer everybody up. He was not supposed to be the one declaring death threats every time somebody glanced at him the wrong way. And then, quite suddenly, Naruto clapped his hands together, an enlightened expression on his face, and drawing Minato out of his thoughts. He quickly got to work, burrowing himself in deep concentration as he did so. Minato might have been impressed by it if it weren't for the fact that Naruto seemed to forget that Minato was there during that time and couldn't hear anything Minato said as a result. The consequence? Their once clean room had become the Cookie Monster's lair. Naruto worked furiously. If Minato thought that Naruto had been working hard before, the little boy was practically running laps around the walls of Konoha now. His tongue was poking out of the corner of his mouth as he tore up the untouched sheets of paper and swabbed them together in a pattern that he hadn't done before. When he was done, Minato's breath caught in the back of his throat. All those picture books, all those stories that he told. He had known that it wouldn't be a good idea. Naruto had made 3 figures. 2 tall and 1 very small. The figures were standing side by side, the small one in the middle of the 2 tall figures. The one on the left kept toppling over because Naruto hadn't made it quite right, but Naruto was adamant in pushing it up every few seconds so that it would stay in its place. Finally, Naruto seemed to get fed up and pushed out a swab of glue on the floor and stuck the figure to the left within it so that it wouldn't fall over anymore. Minato could not find the words to scold him. Naruto beamed at his finished project and quickly scooted back so that he could have a better look at them. He appraised them proudly before tossing away the glue bottle and clapping his hands together, daddy-like. Minato smiled weakly and tried to say something. It came out sounding forced, yes, very nice. Naruto giggled in delight, thankfully not having caught Minato's less than stellar response. He pointed to the figure to the right, Dada. Minato briefly closed his eyes. He had thought it would be like this, but he had hoped. Naruto pointed to the figure in the middle. Me. This hurt. This hurt a lot. Why did he have to go through with this? Naruto pointed at the last figure, and Minato knew that the culmination of events could only lead to one ending. He almost wished that Naruto wouldn't say it, except that he knew it would be terribly unfair to the child, especially when Naruto had worked so hard for this. And then, Naruto beamed, showing off all his teeth with his brilliant smile. Mummy. Minato swallowed, feeling his throat close up and something that felt suspiciously like tears sting his eyes. He pushed it all down, knowing that he had to say something and not caring if his voice came out a croak because Naruto needed the assurance. Yes Naruto, that's Mummy. Kushina, how I wish you were with us. Cloudy with a chance of rain. 3 years, 2 months old, Konoha orphanage. To be quite honest, Minato wasn't sure that Naruto was ready for the outside world yet. He was only 3 years old and had only just learned to run properly. Still, the orphanage had been abuzz for weeks about the big news and Minato had heard that the event was happening today. He wanted Naruto's first day outside the orphanage to be something special, and what was better than witnessing firsthand the signing of the Konoha Treaty, something that was sure to bring peace. Certainly, Naruto wouldn't appreciate it as such, but Minato was sure that his boy would thank him when he turned older. Besides, it wasn't as if Minato was going to make Naruto stay for the whole thing. He would also take Naruto to the places that the 3-year-old would find interesting. He had told Naruto about his plans, and Naruto had hardly been able to sleep the past few days, so excited was he. He had been bouncing off the walls. Literally. It was another unfortunate game that Minato had thought would be good at the time and turned out into something else under Naruchan's guidance. Now, the day had finally come. Naruto snuck out of his room easily enough. The gates were more of a problem. They were designed to be light enough for a full-grown adult to open, but heavy enough so that the children would have a hard time getting out. Thankfully, Minato knew a way around this too. Alright Naruto, now stick the seal on one of the bars, Minato instructed. Naruto nodded and rummaged through his pockets. A few seconds later, he brought out a large, folded-up sheet of paper. He quickly unfolded it. At the center of the page was a unique drawing. It was a circle with many lines running across it, intertwined in complex patterns. The drawing was a lightning seal, meant to, well, make inanimate objects lighter. Minato had spent weeks instructing Naruto on how to draw this seal. They had created a mini mountain in Naruto's room with the amount of crumpled up paper that Naruto had thrown when it was evident that he had yet again drawn it wrong. In fact, Naruto was having a lot of fun with that paper mountain, often using it as a slide whenever he couldn't go to the playground. To be honest, the seal still looked quite awful, but most of the lines were right. It was a very simple seal, and the consequences of getting it wrong weren't immense, so Minato had been satisfied with it. There was also the fact that he didn't think Naruto could stand to make any more, no matter how bored he was. He wondered for a moment if this might be too suspicious, a 3-year-old able to craft a seal, no matter how simple. And then, he waved the thought off. He had specifically told Naruto to check out a book from the orphanage library about sealing, and that might be enough to fool those watching into thinking that Naruto really did create this all by himself. Naruto was an Uzumaki after all. Both Dad? Naruto asked as he pressed the paper against the bars, using both hands to push it downwards. But Naruto, Minato said, now push some chakra into it. Yes, just like we've practiced. Naruto was much too small to begin having chakra control, but thankfully, the Kyuubi allowed Naruto to be able to access chakra at this age. He couldn't really do anything with it at the moment, but seals did not need any amount of precision in the chakra released. As long as chakra was fed to them, the seals would active. Naruto bobbed his head to Minato's instructions and screwed his eyes shut. He made a face of intense concentration and shoved his chakra through. The next second there was a creaking sound and all of a sudden Naruto found himself falling forwards as the gate swung open. Naruto, who had been leaning on the gate, fell face first into the ground. Minato hustled about worriedly, Naru-chan, are you alright? Naruto opened his eyes and the sight of dirt and grass met Minato's vision. Naruto's lower lip trembled, but then he seemed to take a deep breath and push himself up, even standing again. I'm good, he said determinedly, let's go. Minato nodded, though inwardly still worried. Still, he knew that Naruto had at least 3 falls a day, so really, it should be fine. The small 3-year-old blonde started off on his journey, with Minato pointing out the directions to him. As they left the orphanage, Minato's eyes flickered to Naruto's right, noting that the Anbu station there had moved on too. It confirmed his suspicion that the Sandaime had thought to get protected. They hobbled over to the main streets of Konoha. Minato noticed that they were much emptier than he remembered, but that was probably because anybody who knew anything would be down at the treaty signing. Still, that didn't mean that nobody was there. Naruto looked around wide-eyed as he tried to take in everything at once. There was a general busy bustle about the street, with vendors shouting their wares and shopkeepers greeting old customers everywhere. Certainly, it was much more noise than Naruto was used to. The colors were quite amazing too. Even Minato had to admit that it was a bit of a shock after being confined in a rather grey building for the better part of 3 years. While it wasn't quite like how it got during festival time, the street still did look very promising. Unfortunately, due to the fact that both of their attention were elsewhere, they didn't notice the man they were walking towards until it was too late. Naruto staggered suddenly as he bumped into the legs of a man, standing with his back face to them. At the sudden weight crashing into him, the man whirled around, his eyes narrowed as he looked for the offender. "Hey. Watch where you're." The merchant began, only to stop mid-sentence as he finally got a good look at the person who had bumped into him, way down there. He blinked and coughed, a blush spreading across his cheeks. "Oh, sorry." Minato couldn't help but smile at the statement. It was a welcome change from the types of adults that Naruto was used to. Naruto blinked his large, adorable eyes up at the man. "That's okay." The man frowned, something akin to concern creeping up in his eyes. "Kid, shouldn't you be with your parents? Are you lost?" Naruto shook his head. "I live in the orphanage." Minato had told Naruto not to tell anyone about him, but at the same time, he didn't quite want Naruto to start lying so young, so misdirection was the solution they had come up with. Well, misdirection was the solution that Minato had come up with, and Naruto just had to execute it. "Orphanage?" the man repeated, his eyebrows furrowing. Suddenly, recognition lit in his eyes, and his expression changed. When he looked at Naruto again, the hint of kindness previously displayed in the lines of his face was gone. Minato suddenly got a very bad feeling about this. Blonde, blue-eyed, and around 3 years old, the man spat, glaring daggers at the small boy. "I should have known." Minato closed his eyes. If he had known that the merchant would have turned out like this, he would not have let Naruto stay. The moment of kindness had misdirected Minato, and now Naruto would be paying the price. Inwardly, Minato cursed himself. Naruto curled in himself at the man's words. Although he couldn't have understood the man's meaning, he did understand that it was the same tone and the same cold eyes that the nurses always stared at him with. Naruto hadn't been able to stand it then, and he wasn't able to stand it now. The man sneered and bumped past Naruto, causing the small boy to stumble. "Next time," he said coldly, "watch where you're going, brat." The rush of anger that followed the statement surprised even him. Minato snarled, yes, actually snarled, red clouding his vision for just a moment. How dare that man threaten the son of the Yondaime? How dare that pathetic excuse for a person hurt Naruto? Did he want to live? And then, just as quickly as the anger had come, it had left him. Minato blinked, disconcerted. He had not meant to think any of that. He had never gotten so angry in life, so why now? And then Minato's attention was drawn away as Naruto made a sniffle, rubbing hard at his eyes. "Naru-chan," Minato said desperately, "don't listen to the mean man please. Let's keep going, alright? Let's not let the mean man spoil the day." Naruto nodded in agreement, but Minato could tell that it was subdued. After that episode, the smaller blonde hadn't wanted to stay in the marketplace any longer. With a sigh, Minato started directing him towards the place the treaty signing would take place. Along the way, he tried a variety of ways to cheer Naruto up, ranging from telling funny stories to stating that he loved him. Thankfully, Naruto wasn't one to be depressed for long, and soon enough his boy was giggling again. They made it to the street that was holding the treaty signing in record time. Record time for being slow, that is. Minato didn't mind it one bit. Naruto slowed down when he was having fun, and if it so required, Minato would make sure that Naruto took years to get even to the Hokage Tower. There were a crowd of people amongst the streets, which was just about what Minato expected. Everybody wanted to see the Kumonin who would finally make peace with the land of lightning possible. Naruto's eyes had gone as wide as saucers. "There's so many." "Yes, Naru-chan," Minato murmured, just a hint of amusement in his voice, "there are a lot. Unfortunately, with this many people we can't see the ambassador very well." Spotting an empty alleyway not too far from where they were standing, Minato quickly gave instructions to the place. Naruto nodded and began moving. Thankfully he was still short enough to get past the legs of people as opposed to their bodies, which made maneuvering much more easier as legs tended to take up less room. Soon, Naruto had found the spot which half hid him from the crowd, but easily allowed him to see the Kumonin. It really was quite a dirty place, and Minato wouldn't have been satisfied with it normally for his son, but this was a special occasion. It would be a mark in the history books, and he wanted it to coincide with the first day his son had gone out. Naruto frowned after 2 minutes. The Kumo ambassador was receiving congratulations from the other ninja and replying with his own messages of flattery. Naruto made a face and stood. "Wait, Naruto," Minato said, instantly understanding Naruto's aim and trying his best to circumvent it. It wouldn't do for Naruto to leave before it all begun. "Stay here for a bit, please." "That's boring," Naruto complained, but obliged anyways. Minato smiled and sent an image of a boy's hair being ruffled. His smile turned a bit sad, and he couldn't help but wish that it didn't only have to be an image. "Thanks Naru-chan, you're the best," Minato whispered. "I'll tell you a really cool story when we get back, alright?" Naruto's grin turned wider. "One about Iwa," he prompted, earning a laughing yes from Minato. And then, Naruto plopped to the ground, sitting down half hidden behind the wall still, but keeping the crowd of people in sight from the corner of his eyes. Done adjusting himself, Naruto picked up some stray twigs and stones and started doodling on the road. Minato only sighed as Naruto's attention turned elsewhere, but he noticed from Naruto's stance that he himself was still able to see the happenings. He was surprised for a moment before a soft smile spread across his face and a warm tingling welled up inside his chest. Naruto was very thoughtful. Deciding not to waste his gift, Minato turned his attention back to the proceedings. The Kumo ambassador was talking easily enough with the major clan leaders of Konoha, and with Naruto's excellent hearing, Minato was even able to make out what they were saying. It felt refreshing to hear some language that was his level, even if Minato wasn't quite fond of flattery himself. And then, suddenly, the Kumo ambassador's line of sight changed. He had swept the crowds, using the gesture to emphasize something he said when his eyes alighted upon Naruto. The Kumo ambassador's eyes flashed with something. Minato wasn't sure what, but suddenly he felt as if he didn't want to stick around to find out. "Naruto." Naruto's head snapped up, catching the eye of the Kumo ambassador, whose eyes had narrowed before he turned back to the other nin, chatting as if nothing had transpired. Minato felt a wave of panic. "Naruto, I think it's time to go," Minato said quickly, trying to keep his voice as calm and nonchalant as possible, as to not startle his boy, but he was finding it hard. Thankfully, Naruto didn't complain about leaving. He had been getting more and more obedient over the past months and was finally growing out of what had been universally agreed upon as the terrible twos. Minato couldn't be more glad for the timing. Naruto got up from his place on the ground, only brushing off his clothes at Minato's gentle reminder. "If you catch cold?" Naruto asked curiously. There was a bit of a silence, in which Minato didn't really know what to say. He wasn't sure where the question had even come from. Still, he was touched by the thoughtfulness. "No, Neri-chan, but thanks for asking," Minato said warmly as Naruto bobbed his head down in pride and skipped out of the alley. Already he was feeling the sensation of danger leave him, and he couldn't help but feel that he had been a little foolish to be so alarmed back there. After all, Minato thought fondly, Naruto is a cute child. The Kumo ambassador probably just wasn't expecting that. There's no way that Naruto could be connected to me so easily. There are plenty of blonde orphans running around here. Still, there was no more reason to stay. Naruto have obviously gotten bored, and despite the logic of it all being nothing, Minato decided that it was better to be safe than sorry. "Oh, by the way, that was a very nice bunny that you drew back there." The smile fell off Naruto's face, a glum expression crossing his features as he stared down at his shoes. It was a lion. Puzzle pieces. And 4 months, Naruto's room. Naruto was sprawled belly first across the floor, his chin resting on the palms of his hands as he squinted at the tome before him. He was propped up by his elbows, and occasionally he would slide one arm out to flip a page, which was very rare, or point to a word that he didn't know, which was much more common. He pulled the lever, Naruto. "Lever all the way down to where it said full steam ahead." Minato beamed in pride as his son successfully read the last sentence on the page. "Great job, Naruto. That was all correct." They'd been working on reading for ages now. Naruto hadn't been getting it very quickly, but Minato was patient. It helped that they didn't have a lot else to do, cooped up in Naruto's room as they were. Naruto closed the book with a soft whop and pushed himself to his feet. Grabbing the book again, he totted over to the large pile of picture stories stored in the corner of his room and placed his book gently on the top stack. Minato had been adamant about keeping things clean, and now it had become habit for Naruto too. "What next?" Naruto asked excitedly, scrutinizing the pile of books with an almost expert eye. While Naruto hadn't taken to reading at first, when he realized that the best stories were told by books, and that if he read them himself, then he wouldn't have to rely on his daddy, Naruto had become a regular bookworm. Minato chuckled, "Neri-chan, you've already read 3 books today. Wouldn't you rather do something else?" Naruto thought for a moment, his head poised cutely to the side. Finally, he nodded, "Okay. Game." Minato beamed. Well, he loved the fact that he had gotten his Neri-chan reading. Exercise was important too. "Alright. Now, which game shall we play?" "Let's see, we played mixed match yesterday, so how about, oh, here's a game we haven't played in a while. Do you still remember this one, Naruto? The floor is the sea, the carpet is the land, and you." "No fall," Naruto said, but Minato noticed that there was something wrong with his voice. Naruto was looking down now, tugging at the edge of his shirt. "I don't want to play that." Minato opened his mouth and then closed it. To be honest, he had forgotten about that disastrous day in the courtyard where Naruto had gotten in trouble for playing a game that Minato had made up. It looked like Naruto still hadn't quite gotten over it yet. A small frown spread across Minato's features. Now that he thought about it, there were a lot of things his Naruto-chan didn't do that could be attributed to a past event. Such a trait would not do. He did not want Naruto to become a turtle who hid from the world. That decided, Minato decided to change topics. He smiled, making sure to keep his voice light. Alright then, if you don't want to play that game, it's fine. Say, it's been quite a while since we ventured outside. You've been cooped up for 2 months. So, what do you say to taking a break and going out to play today? The look of panic flashed across Naruto's face, and he instantly turned back to his book stack. No. I want to read more about George. I knew it, he really is afraid of the outside. It isn't even the novelty of it. It's the villagers. George will still be here when we come back, Minato said gently. He's a tough little monkey. Come on Naruto, you haven't been outside since our last little outing 2 months ago. Surely you don't want that to be your last trip. Naruto's face fell. I don't really like the outside. Can't we just stay in here? The look on Naruto's face almost made Minato give in. Almost. Just this once though, Minato knew for a fact that what he had suggested was better for Naruto in the end, so he didn't let up. Come on Naruto, I'll be there with you. What's there to be scared of? Not scared. Just don't wanna. Minato frowned slightly. Naruto could talk much better now and very rarely dropped pronouns. It spoke to how worried the little blonde was. He let out a sigh. He supposed that the best way to do this was to get to the root of the problem. Naru-chan, you don't like the looks that the other adults give you, right? Minato said tenderly, but it's alright, really. The villagers are scared of things that they shouldn't be, and fear makes them act irrationally. They don't really mean to hurt you, so just ignore them for now. Let's have fun doing the other things that can be done outside. Naruto frowned doubtfully, and Minato waited patiently for his reply. He knew he couldn't rush his baby's answer. Why? Naruto finally said, sniffling. At any other time Minato might have smiled, because the 5 Ws were quickly becoming Naruto's favorite words, but Naruto had asked it at a hard time this time. Minato sighed deeply, wondering if one day Naruto would be able to understand them, because they are ignorant, Naruto. They have not seen what a great boy you are. Don't worry, one day, you'll change all of that, and they'll come to love you. You're too good of a boy for that not to happen. Trust me. Naruto shuffled his feet around, looking disbelieving but at the very least, willing to trust his daddy. Oh okay. Good, Minato smiled. Now, shall we get going? After a quick cleanup and pat around to make sure that they had brought everything that they needed, Naruto finally snuck out of his room. He was being very slow about it, practically dragging his feet, but Minato couldn't blame him. Finally, they arrived at the orphanage gates. Using a spare lightning seal he had made, Naruto easily pushed open the gates. He did not so easily step outside, however. Naruto simply stood there, seemingly frozen in time, his hand still half holding the gates open as he stared at the large expanse outside the orphanage. Blue eyes were wide with fear, and faint tremors suddenly began reeking his body. Naruto began shakily and couldn't continue. Minato felt his heart give a quiver, and all thoughts of going out nearly disappeared. He had not thought it would be this bad. Quite suddenly, all the resolve he had gathered to force his baby into the marketplace withered and died. I understand, Minato said gently. Alright, we don't have to go back if you really don't want to. I'm sorry for trying to make you, Naru-chan. Naruto looked down, tears in his eyes. I don't want to disappoint you, daddy. You'll never be a disappointment to me, Minato said soothingly. Truly, we can go back. He trailed off as something which he had simply taken for granted was suddenly pushed to the forefront of his mind. A slow smile spread across Minato's lips. He believed he had just found the perfect solution. How about this? Minato asked with a lot more cheer in his voice, since I still think you need to play outside more often, and I know that you like being out here, so why don't we just play in an area that doesn't have any nasty folk? Would you be alright with that? Naruto sniffled and rubbed at his face. We were. The forests, Minato replied gently. You've read about that, right? There's usually no people and lots of animals and plants for you to play with. What do you say? Normally he might have been worried about Naruto running into unpleasant animals or other such things in the forest, but it was at times like these that it was very convenient to have an on-boot guard with them. Naruto smiled brilliantly, and Minato just knew that he made the right choice. Survival tests. In 5 months, Academy Forest. The birds chirped merrily as they flew past each other, telling of their great adventures in evading the two-legged predators and bragging of their individual morning meals. Occasionally they would land on a branch to rest their wings, only to spring up again at the slightest movements. The trees themselves would wave goodbye, their branches oscillating long after the birds had disappeared. The taller trees made no break in their greetings, with the wind lending them their strength. The scent of honeysuckle and fresh wood permeated the air, enticing the small critters to scurry out of their underground homes to bask in the feel of the forest. The afternoon sun shone brightly, giving the whole place a warm, enchanting glow. Naruto hummed softly under his breath as he plodded along the forest trail, eyes alight with excitement. Minato had been right in predicting that his little ball of energy would fit right in with the rest of nature, and he even had proof. Whenever Naruto had free time, he would beg for Minato to take him to the forest, where he could point things out and wonder at animals. Other than being a great outlet for Naruto's energy, and not to mention a nice way to build up muscle, the forest had also become a place of learning. Minato was by no means a botanical expert, but he did know the basics needed for survival, and he taught Naruto such. They'd been here so many times that Naruto had even started being able to distinguish between the different types of herbs. Overhead, the Anbu guard watched Naruto silently, always making sure that the blonde did not get into too much trouble. Minato had done what he could, guiding Naruto to the forest reserved for academy students, and the Anbu guard made short work of the rest. "What's dat?" Naruto asked as he came to a stop, pausing so that he could point one stubby finger at an unfamiliar plant. He did that often, and Minato would answer just as if he were teaching Naruto about his furniture all over again. Minato took a moment to examine the plant, the images of various flowers coursing through his head. When he realized which one it was, he smiled. "It's marjoram, Naruto. It's a great spice to use when you've just caught fresh meat, which is rather tasteless if I must say." Naruto nodded, his tongue rolling with a new word as he committed it to memory, marjoram. They continued on their way. It was afternoon already, and soon it would get dark. The difference might not be so noticeable in the village, but it would be huge in a forest such as this. Naruto knew that Minato would ask him to go back soon, so little Naruto wanted to get as much exploring done as possible. Minato watched in contentment as Naruto ran around chasing butterflies for a bit more, but eventually, it was time to go. He opened his mouth to tell his son so, when suddenly, they heard some voices. "Aight." As if Shiryu. Who was the one who failed the survival portion of the exam last year? Naruto, ever the curious one, stopped chasing his butterfly and instead, started towing towards the voice. Minato found that he was curious too. Although the tone was crass, the voice itself was high-pitched and feminine, pointing to a small girl. Plus, the Anbu had evidently not seen these people as a threat, so it should be relatively safe. When they made it to the source, they spotted 3 children sitting in a small clearing, backpacks scattered across the field. Naruto quickly hid behind a tall tree, observing them from a distance. There were 3 boys, one was holding up something that looked like a mushroom, while the other 2 stared at him contemplatively. They looked to be about 8 years old. Minato blinked and belatedly realized that they must have been here for the survival test, where the academy students had to stay in the forest for one night and survive. It was actually the safest activity ever, as there was nothing in the forest that could possibly hurt anyone, but the students didn't know that. He did remember going through it when he was younger. "So Yuta, do you think this is edible?" the boy holding the mushroom was saying, turning to look at the boy with red hair. With a flush, Minato realized that the one holding the mushroom wasn't a boy at all but rather, a girl. Her coal black hair was cropped short just like a male's, and her clothing did not distinguish her sex, but when she had turned her head, Minato had caught a glimpse of her face, and he knew then that mixed with the sound of her voice, she could definitely not be classified as a boy. The boy dubbed Yuta replied, looking as if he were thinking hard as his brown eyes scrunched up in thought. His pallid face was dotted with freckles, which only served to look more ridiculous, as his overly large glasses slid slightly off the bridge of his nose. "I think so, Kaoru. That mushroom, it doesn't have any bad spots, does it?" Naruto gasped and hopped out of his hiding place. Kaoru, who had her back facing them, didn't notice, but the other 2 boys did. Their eyes widened considerably as Naruto pointed one, accusing finger at the mushroom. "That's poisonous." Kaoru snapped around, "Holy shit, what?" And then, the boy who hadn't spoken yet, which Minato could only presume to be Shiryu, let out a loud, exuberant laugh. "Wow, amazing kid. See Kaoru, I told you, that mushroom's no good." Naruto, who had flinched back from Kaoru's yell, suddenly beamed at the dark-haired boy's praise. Blue eyes lit up as he emerged from the woods, running over to where the 3 were seated. And then, he took a deep breath, examining the mushroom closely before nodding seriously. "That's clitisib, for sewer." Kaoru was apparently too stunned to stop him. Shiryu's grin went from ear to ear. He turned lazy black eyes to the only female member of their group. "Didn't I tell you, Kaoru? You shouldn't have doubted my all-seeing eyes." "Stop making fun of the Hyuga," the boy wearing glasses, Yuta, said in a clipped tone, "and the mushroom was not dangerous. Clitisib is, how should I put this? It makes you poop," Naruto concluded, nodding his head sagely. Kaoru facepalmed and Shiryu let out another rambunctious laugh. Yeah, the girl muttered as she hit Shiryu across the shoulder. "Laugh it up. You, kid, are awesome," the dark-haired boy said lightly. He reached out a hand, a wide smile spread across his face. I'm Shiro by the way, and I'm not afraid to make fun of the people who deserve it. You can count on me to back you up. Uda and Kaoru shared a glance, which Minato not failed to notice. It went over Naruto's head though as the little blonde-haired boy took the hand with a giggle. I'm Naruto. The good name, Shiro murmured with a small grin as he shook the blonde's hand gently before letting go, earning another beam of delight from the little ray of sunshine. Looking as if he had decided that it would be his turn next, Uda pushed his glasses up, the reflected light blocking out his eyes. Minato couldn't help but wonder amusedly if he were related to the Chunin named Abisu, who delivered his reports in a similar manner. I am Shirayama Uda, date of birth January 8, age 9, gender male, height 1.3 meters, weight 27.5 kilos, blood type B. It is my pleasure to meet you. Kaoru made a face. Aw, quitted Uda. You're going to scare the kid. As much as I'd hate to agree with the she-devil, Shiro said teasingly, I think you should tone it down a little, Uda. Don't need to be so nervous, Naru-chan here's only a 5-year-old. 3, Naruto piped up. Eh? Shiro turned back to Naruto with an amused look in his eyes. What's that? I'm 3 years old. Naruto said with a big toothy grin, holding up 3 fingers. Shiro blinked and blinked again. And then, his jaw slackened. What, seriously? For the love of all that's holy, Kaoru said in surprise, we got outsmarted by a 3-year-old. Uda pushed the still blinking Shiro to the side as he leaned in closer, the tip of his nose practically touching Naruto's. The brown-haired boy's eyes narrowed as he carefully scrutinized every inch of Naruto's face, although Minato seriously doubted that the close proximity would allow him to see much. Naruto giggled. Uda said as he pulled back, pushing up his glasses once again. Very interesting. It seems that our little boy here is something of a prodigy. Off to the side, Shiro rolled his eyes good-naturedly. You didn't have to go in close to come to that realization. Uda gave a loud sniff, crossing his arms and looking away, ignoring the other boy. Prodige I? Naruto asked in confusion, as Minato had never mentioned the word to him before. It means you're smart, kid, Kaoru said as she ruffled Naruto's hair. She had a slight but kind smile on her face. I'm Kaoru, by the way. I'm the eldest here. In both age and mentality. But not in intelligence, Shiro piped up and winked at Naruto, that title belongs to our little Naru-chan here. It was Minato who was the one who beamed in pride. His Naru-chan was smart indeed. He was starting to really like these kids. If he could take another Genin squad right now, they would be it. Anyways Naru-chan, Kaoru said, a curious tone in her voice as she completely dismissed the dark-haired boy. If you're only 3, what are you doing in the forest all by yourself? Or are you lost? The other 2 boys shared a glance behind Kaoru's back and nodded in agreement. I was chasing Butterfly-chan, Naruto said, puffing up his chest. And then, he hesitated, no doubt remembering his father's warning about not revealing anything about him. Instead, Naruto waved vaguely in the direction where he had come from, and I'm not by myself. Dear's A and Anbu with me. Day neighbor come out to play doh. Out of the corner of Naruto's eyes, Minato saw the Anbu stiffen in surprise. He winced lightly. It might not have been wise on Naruto's part to reveal that he was aware of them. It would be another report that would go back to Sarutobi and only serve to make the Sandayame more confused. The 3 9-year-olds' reactions were much easier to map. 3 pairs of eyes widened in surprise and just the slightest bit of awe. Shiro turned his head, face half hidden from Naruto, but Minato could read his lips anyway. Clan heir? Shiro mouthed, a questioning look on his face. Uda, at whom the comment was directed at, shook his head. Kaoru only let out a low whistle. Hot damn. That's something, Naru-chan. Stop swearing around a kid, Shiro said weakly, brushing Kaoru's arm with a good-natured punch. Kaoru rolled her eyes. Whatever. Naruto gained a curious expression on his face, and in that instant Minato just knew that Naruto was going to ask what swearing was. Hastily, Minato moved to intervene. Naruto, can you ask them why they're all taking the survival exam together? He had not allowed Naruto to hear any bad words as of yet, and he did not want Naruto to know of them until he was much older. He had let Kaoru's previous language go because he had been so delighted to find people who treated Naruto nicely that he hadn't really registered that he might not want those words around his baby, but now that it was explicitly clear, he would do his best to prevent that meeting. Naruto nodded and did as his father asked. The 3 looked surprised at the question, but it was Uda who spoke first. Ah, so you know about that too, then. How interesting indeed. We have known each other since our youth, and we have decided that this test is best taken with people who can be explicitly trusted. Yeah, we're like childhood friends or something like that, Kaoru snorted at the implications, but it's only cause our parents work together on the same squad. Yep, Shiro chipped in, they wanted us to be all friendly like, and now it's gotten into habit to have Kaoru's yapping in the background. Couldn't relax if I didn't hear her dulcet tones. I'd be worried all day about when she'd unexpectedly pop up. He winked conspiratorially at Naruto. Naruto giggled. They spent quite a bit more time talking and just generally playing around, despite the sky getting dark, and the chances of Minato getting Naruto out before evening grew less and less. Naruto just looked so happy, and Minato didn't have the heart to tell him that they should go. Thankfully, it seemed that they had arrived at the last day of the academy survival test, because before long, a loud chiming bell rang across the forest, signaling the end to the test. Naruto had been very visibly upset when the 3 academy students told him that they had to go, but he brightened when they told him where to visit. All of that done, they headed back to the school grounds, waving goodbye to Naruto and erecting a promise from him to visit. And then, they were gone, leaving Naruto standing alone in the clearing. Naruto's head was bowed, his blue eyes wide. Minato felt a tingle of worry course through him as he wondered if Naruto was really alright with them leaving. He opened his mouth, Naru-chan. They had warm eyes, Naruto said as he looked up, interrupting Minato with a small flush on his cheeks. I think that'll jibe the village Anathir Try. The catch is Scarecrow. And 8 months, Konoha Market Square. And what's that one, Naruto? Minato asked with a smile, bringing up the picture of the article situated slightly to their left. Naruto turned towards the item, squinting his eyes as he thought hard about it. Finally, he nodded confidently and pointed one chubby finger at the vegetable, asparagus. Minato beamed in pride, that's correct. They were learning their words in the marketplace, and Minato couldn't think of a better place to do it. The different scents and sounds really seemed to help out Naruto somehow, as if he were more motivated to learn in a crowded setting. They were currently inspecting a vegetable stand, though some distance away as to not disturb the business. The man tending the stand thankfully ignored them, allowing the two to continue on with their day of learning. Minato pointed out another piece of produce, and that one. Clementine. Good. You're amazing, Naru-chan. Wow, I think you got all of them on this cart. Should we move on to another stand? Naruto nodded happily and whirled around, intent on finding another booth to test his skills in memorizing the different objects of the world. He was used to this routine by now. Naruto looked around, his head going wildly to and fro as he tried to seek out another place to start. Naruto didn't go by convention, much preferring to learn what looked interesting, rather than go row by row. Minato didn't discourage the habit. Minato hummed as he followed Naruto's gaze, making it a game to try and figure out what stand Naruto would choose. There was very little to do in his life, stuck in Naruto as he was, and he had to make up some forms of entertainment for himself. It was then that he noticed a distinctive but familiar head of hair poking out amongst the crowds. Naruto's gaze had moved on, but Minato wasn't letting it go that easily. Hold up, Naruto, look to your right. Minato cried, his voice just slightly higher pitched than usual. Naruto's eyes widened, startled and confused, but he did as his father asked. He had never heard Minato sound like that before, and Minato would have felt bad for scaring him, but his attention was solely focused on the figure he had thought he had seen. When Naruto turned his attention back to the area and his eyes caught the unique form of the person again, Minato knew he wasn't wrong. There was no mistaking that flyaway silver hair, the tip-tit-ate, or that thin black mask. Hokage Kakashi was standing with his back ramrod straight in the middle of Konoha Market Square, looking intently at the arrangement of canned fruit set before him. There was no doubt that he was planning to buy his next assortment of nutritious if not tasteless foods, all for the sake of completing the mission. A hail of memories flooded Minato. How could he? How could he have forgotten about Kakashi? Minato was no fool. He knew that he was the closest thing that Kakashi had to another father, despite the fact that Minato was nothing like Hokage Tsukumo. The blonde could not have hoped to match the ancient war hero in terms of paternity, as he had only been 17 when Kakashi was put onto his squad, and to be honest, Minato had been a little overwhelmed by the job at that time. He did not know how to care for a 5-year-old, especially when that 5-year-old did not seem to want any caring. Nevertheless, one could not be on the same team for 8 years without growing bonds, and with their age difference, Minato's attitude, and Kakashi's past, it only made sense that the silver-haired boy had started to see something of the father in Minato. Minato had not been blind to it. He saw the way that the boy had hung on to his every word, only disobeying when his personal grievances against his real father came into play. And then, Minato had given his life to seal the Kyuubi, and Kakashi had been left alone again. There was still Rin, of course, but one person made a very short list of people that Kakashi could rely on. Before Obito's death, and that thought still sent a pang through Minato's chest, for he had failed Obito, Kakashi had made no efforts to find people whom he could share his pain with, and Minato had no doubt that fact never changed. The boy had only been 14 years old, and he had lost another father figure again. Minato felt so absolutely stupid and maybe just a bit cruel to have forgotten completely about his student. Naruto was not the only one who needed him, and yet by the time that Minato had come out of his self-imposed exile in Naruto's mind, Naruto was the only one he could see that needed help. Because of that, he had forgotten that there were others too in the world. Because of that, he had forgotten that there were still people yet who lived and needed life. He could not believe that he had been so wrapped up in Kushina's legacy that he had even forgotten about Kakashi. "Naruto," Minato whispered in quietly, urgently, "see that man over there with the spiky silver hair and black mask? We've got to go see him." Naruto bobbed his head obediently, not imagining that his father would request anything that was unreasonable. There was no doubt in Minato's head that Naruto thought this was just another game that he was inventing, when in reality, it was anything but. As they neared Minato's old student, Minato began to see things more clearly. Naruto skillfully weaved his way through the prongs of rushing people, but for once, Minato's attention wasn't on his son. There was a slump in Kakashi's shoulders that Minato had never seen before, not even when they had been forced to kill hundreds during the Great War. The way he was talking to the stand owner was more short and crisp than ever before, and there was an alertness in his stance that bespoke of borderline paranoia. It was worse than he had imagined. And then, the scent of blood and kunai instantly assaulted Naruto's nostrils, though of course Naruto couldn't distinguish what they were. Minato gasped. He knew that there was only one reason that Kakashi would smell like that and look as tired as he did, especially since they were no longer at war. Kakashi had joined the Anbu. It was the last thing he had wanted for any of his students. The Ansatsu Senjutsu Takushu Butai were a special squad of ninja that specialized in assassination and working from the shadows. One could apply for it as soon as they reached Chunin, though of course very few actually passed the test. The Beyonbu was not glorious, and the only thing it guaranteed was endless slaughter and a quiet death. Honestly, only those with the strongest wills, who would not mind dying nameless for the sake of their village, should have been an Anbu, but many a times the place had turned into a haven for those who did not want to deal with life. Minato was very afraid that Kakashi had joined not for the former reason. And then, Kakashi turned around. It was not for any particular reason. The store owner had finally finished packaging Kakashi's request, and the Jonin was reaching into his pocket for money. Unfortunately, that reach had caused him to turn his body slightly, and it was towards the direction Minato and Naruto were coming from. The silver-haired boy's soul eye widened, and Minato knew that he had spotted Naruto. Kakashi immediately turned back to the shopkeeper, muttering a few quick words. The store owner nodded as Kakashi inclined his head in thanks and put his hands up in a very familiar seal. Minato inwardly cursed, "Hurry Naruto, he's going to." The swirl of leaves later, and Kakashi had disappeared, leaving only an exasperated shopkeeper behind. Naruto's eyes widened adorably, he disappeared. The shopkeeper smiled when he heard a child's voice and glanced down, only to frown when his eyes skimmed over the whisker marks on Naruto's cheeks and turn away again. Naruto didn't even pay it any attention. He was far too used to it by now. "Yes, Naruto, he did," Minato said softly, just barely holding back a sigh. It was not that he did not understand why Kakashi might not have wanted to see Naruto, but personally he had been hoping for the other case. "Wow," Naruto murmured in amazement, "so cool." Despite himself, the older blonde could not help but smile at his son's enthusiasm. He reminded Minato of another child who had been easily impressed by the shinobi arts. That child had turned out to be the love of his life. "Naruto," Minato said suddenly, "that was your Kakashi Nyasan. I was his teacher when I was, before you were born. You remember all those stories you read about big brothers? Well, he is like that with you." For some reason, that caused Naruto's good mood to disappear. He frowned, suddenly gaining a melancholy air. Minato blinked. He would have thought that Naruto would be happy to gain more family. And then, Naruto spoke again, and it all became clear. But if that's so, then he didn't like me. He ran away." Minato could have slapped himself for missing it earlier. Of course Naruto would take it the wrong way that Kakashi had left like that. Indeed, if Minato guessed correctly, Kakashi did not want to see Naruto, but it would not be for the same reasons that the villagers had. Kakashi had more to his circumstances, but Minato could not expect his 3-year-old to understand that. It's like a hide-and-seek game, Naruto," Minato reassured his boy. He almost felt a little guilty for using his boy like this, but he had ignored his responsibilities for long enough, and besides, he was sure that every word he was saying was true. "I'm sure Kakashi will love you very much, but he's kind of afraid of people, so you have to catch him first, before he'll see that you're not so scary." Naruto frowned thoughtfully, and for a moment Minato was worried that his explanation wasn't enough, but then his son gave an energetic nod, a bright smile crossing his face. He patted his chest, sounding much too understanding for Mianto's tastes. "He's like me, right? I know what it's like to be scored. Okay. I'll convince Kakashi Nyasan that there's no need to be scored of people." Minato smiled sadly, wishing that Naruto didn't have to understand. Still, what was done, and it had given Naruto wisdom beyond his years. Thank you, Naruto. I'm sure Kakashi will appreciate you very much. He wondered if Rin was hiding somewhere out there, too. Minato decided that he needed to keep an eye out for her. But first things first, he needed to drag Kakashi out of his slump and back into the world of the living. Hidden. And 9 months, the flouncing frog. The beat of the music was hypnotic, lulling the occupants of the room into a serene daze. Despite the fact that it was a bar and not a club, the dim lighting and the musky scents in the air made the place seem more sensual than it actually was. It was not surprising for a place named as a tribute to Jiraiya-sama. Hokage Kakashi sat on one of the stools at the very corner of the bar, his eye hooded as he sipped at his drink and observed the general atmosphere around him out of his peripheral. People were chattering incessantly about their lives or things that did not pertain to their lives, in an effort to forget everything miserable for the night, a lot of good humor, but also a faint sheen of desperation in their eyes. Some were dealing with it better, looking as though they had actually moved on with their lives, or they were just hiding it better. Anyone who got near Kakashi was met with stone-cold silence and an impassive stare that was somehow more intimidating than glares. They left quickly after that, not completely able to hide the uncomfortable tilts of their shoulders. It was not that Kakashi wanted to purposefully make them uncomfortable. Unlike some, he did not take joy in watching people squirm. Quite simply, he had nothing that he wanted to talk to with anyone. He did not want to make friends only to watch them leave him, and he did not want to waste time on small talk that was sure to bring him nowhere. If others approached, that was their decision, but whether or not he obliged them was his decision. The Hokage genius shifted in his seat, adjusting his position to a more comfortable one as he took another swig of his bottle. To be honest, he did not like the bar. The drinks tasted nasty and the girls were annoying. But he had felt like coming here tonight for some sentimental reason or another. The silver-haired teen had thought he had stamped it out of himself, but sometimes the feelings did come creeping back and he was as susceptible to them as anyone else. His birthday was coming up, but Kakashi did not feel like celebrating it. There would be no one to celebrate it with, anyhow. The silver-haired shinobi swirled the drink in his hands, watching as the liquid sloshed to and fro from one side of the bottle to the other. He was turning 17 in a few weeks. It would be just 1 year to add to the life that he had been allowed due to the sacrifices of his teammates. He'd somehow managed to survive nearly 4 years in Anbu, while all around him, his teammates died. He thought if he grieved anymore, even his body would simply fall apart. And so he'd become numb. Numb to the world around him and numb to the things that he felt inside. He wasn't sure he was succeeding very well, but it kept him going, and that was all he needed. So long as his nightmares and flashbacks did not affect his performance, nobody cared, and he did not want anybody to. He did not want to be taken off Anbu. The work was tough and scarring, but the constant workload kept Kakashi's mind off the memories he so desperately wanted to avoid. He wasn't sure what the alternative would be, but he did not want to find out. And then, the little blonde thing had popped into his life. The first day in the marketplace had been a pure coincidence, and Kakashi had been shocked beyond all measure to see his sensei's son standing so innocently among the villagers. He had known logically that Namikaze Naruto would be somewhere in Konoha, but the child had been kept out of the public's eye for the better of the past 4 years that Kakashi had nearly forgotten about him. He'd left right away. The dazzling features and familiar Uzumaki smile had ripped Kakashi's heart, bringing to the surface the memories that Kakashi had worked long and hard to bury. He had to leave or risk breaking down. To be honest, Naruto did not look much like Uzumaki Kushina or Namikaze Minato at his age. He was only 3 years and 9 months, which was not old enough for someone to have distinguishing features. Still, with Kakashi's knowledge of who Naruto really was, the connections were all too easy to draw, and there was no avoiding the fact that the new Jinchuriki of Konoha was his mentor's son. Kakashi had hoped to never see the child again, or, if that were too unrealistic, to at least never be in his line of sight again. But that was not to be. After that incident, Kakashi not go outside without seeing the blonde. He did not know if Kami were playing a trick on him or if he were just really that unlucky, but every time he went to the marketplace, the 3-year-old would be there. And the 3-year-old would not just stand there. If he spotted Kakashi, he would chase after the silver-haired teen, although Kakashi could not for the life of him figure out what would make the child act that way. So far, the Anbu genius had been able to escape every time, but it was getting tiresome. He didn't know why the child would chase after him. A 3-year-old by all rights should not know that Kakashi was supposed to be taking care of him instead of wasting away in Anbu. A 3-year-old should not know that Kakashi was neglecting his duties. And yet, a 3-year-old did. And every time Kakashi was spotted by the little boy, he was stricken by guilt of what he had neglected. It was as if Minato's ghost had come back to haunt him. Kakashi smiled bitterly at the thought, his eyes gaining a more empty quality to them. While he was not superstitious, the allegation was true enough. Minato-sensei would not be pleased with what he was doing with himself. Still, even though he knew that, there was nothing else that he could do. He could never be the perfect person that Minato-sensei would have been happy with, that Rin definitely wanted, and that Obito needed. It was then that Kakashi noticed that someone else was approaching him, and that observation brought him out of his thoughts. Even while thinking, Kakashi had attention on his surroundings. It had been this habit more than anything else that had kept him alive all these years. It was just an observation like any other, and Kakashi wasn't going to pay it much mind until the stocky figure and the square features registered in his mind. Kakashi turned his head ever so slightly and nodded towards his new neighbor. Sarutobi Asuma was one of the few shinobi that Kakashi did know outside of missions. Out of all of Kakashi's acquaintances, Asuma was the one least annoying. He at the very least knew when to keep quiet. "Hey," Asuma smiled as he slid into a seat beside Kakashi. He waved the bartender over and quickly gave his order. "It's your birthday soon, isn't it, Hokage? Happy birthday." "Please don't," Kakashi said flatly, turning back to face the front and silently wondering if he'd been too early to judge Asuma as not annoying. He took another swig of his bottle, only to find no liquid coming to meet his lips. Frowning, Kakashi tilted the neck of his bottle over, revealing clear sparkling water droplets sticking to the inside. He had finished the water he had brought to the bar, and he was not going to order another drink from the bartender. The Onbu did not drink. They did not know when a mission might come up, and they always had to be alert. There was no rest for the Ansatsu Senjutsu. He slid off his stool. There was no point in staying here any longer. "What? Leaving so soon?" Asuma asked as he eyed Kakashi critically, leaning back against the long table at which they were sitting. "There are things to do," Kakashi said briskly, brushing past a heavier shinobi and heading towards the door. "Geez," Asuma muttered to himself, before raising his voice slightly as he called out to the departing Kakashi. It wasn't loud enough to attract everybody's attention, but it was certainly loud enough to get a fuse. "Hey, it's rare to see you by yourself nowadays, Kakashi. Where's that little blonde growth that's attached himself to you?" "Not here," Kakashi said flatly, turning back around just to stop Asuma from telling every single shinobi present his little problem. "This is a bar." In the span of the time that Kakashi had turned his back on the brown-haired man, Asuma had somehow lit a cigarette and put back his lighter. He still looked as relaxed as ever. So you're avoiding the kid," Asuma said as he took a puff of smoke, thankfully lowering his voice. "Why?" Kakashi did not answer. He wondered if everyone would be on his case for that. Even Guy had noticed Naruto's strange attachment to the silver-haired Jonin. Kakashi was not stupid. He knew that everybody who knew him was probably wondering what he'd do to a child who was being too nosy, but he had never thought that Asuma would be one of those who fell in with the crowd. He wanted to for once and for all to stop the questions, even if it meant poking into places which were expressly forbidden. "You've taken up smoking," he observed. Asuma's eyes glittered, and Kakashi knew he had guessed rightly. "Ah yes, it seems like everyone's taken up a vice now that the Yondaime has died." Asuma suddenly paused, and Kakashi knew he had messed up. Kakashi did not mean to seize up, but even for all the training he had undergone through Onbu, he could not completely keep down his reaction at that man's name. He had tensed like an academy student who had been put through only the basics. It wasn't even subtle. "I see," Asuma took another long drag of his cigarette, though this time his gaze was contemplative. "I didn't realize that you would see that boy as the jailer of the Kyuubi first, and the Yondaime's legacy second. Or is it perhaps, he reminds you too much of the Yondaime?" It was an open secret amongst the high-ranked shinobi who Uzumaki Naruto really was. People like Danzo, the Sandaime, and clan heads were all aware of the boy's heritage. People who were especially close to the Hokages also knew, so long as they could be trusted to keep a secret. Asuma had apparently been lucky enough to be privy to the information as the Sandaime's son, even if the brown-haired Chunin was not directly the Hokage's heir. That privilege belonged to Sarutobi Hikari and her unborn child. Asuma sighed, his eyes glittering like he knew, when he really didn't. "Just a piece of advice. Don't avoid the boy just because he gives you too much bad memories." Kakashi's single eye flashed, hostile despite himself. The other nin, barely an acquaintance at best, had no right to try and ride his life. What would you know? Asuma looked away, only affording Kakashi a look at his profile. And then, he smiled, and it was a painful, heartbreaking smile, because, Kakashi, you are quite possibly the only one he has left. And trust me, no boy wants to be left alone. The words jolted his heart. Although Kakashi was by no means a sympathetic person, it had been overly callous of him to forget the story with Asuma. He looked down, ashamed in spite of himself. "I'm sorry." Asuma waved a hand dismissively, although that sad look in his eyes had not disappeared. "No problem, no problem. Just give the kid a chance, alright? If not for yourself, then for me. I know we're not exactly friends, but we're comrades, right? Kakashi swallowed, feeling his left eye burn with the statement. Those that break the rules and regulations are scum. But those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. He closed his eyes and nodded, very well. I will give it a shot. The day after next, Kakashi did not avoid Naruto when he tried to come up to the silver-haired nin. As he was buying his produce, he simply waved for the little blonde to wait as he finished his purchases. Out of the corner of his eye he noticed the 3-year-old fidget uncontrollably, no doubt wondering what had made Kakashi finally give up running away. It was what Kakashi at that age would have questioned. What do you want? Kakashi asked bluntly as he gave the last of his money to the vendor and turned around to face the smaller blonde. There was no denying that the 3-year-old had been following him deliberately. The child shuffled his feet and then took a breath, turning wide blue eyes upwards to meet Kakashi's. The silver-haired teen couldn't help but suck in a breath because despite knowing who Naruto was, he still hadn't expected the boy to resemble his sensei so much. You look lone. Why? Naruto said, his tongue rolling at the last word as if testing it out. He took a deep breath and stuck out his hand. Let's be friends. Kakashi blinked and blinked again. The statement and the delivery had been so ridiculous that for a moment he could not respond. Of all things, how could that be the reason? He thought about saying no because he didn't need any friends. More than that, maybe he didn't want any friends. He didn't want to experience the sensation of loss again because he was unsure of how he could handle it. But, looking into those wide blue eyes that resembled Minato-sensei so much, looking at that wide grin that reminded him of Obito, how could Kakashi say no? Almost against his desire, his body moved forwards, crouching low as he took Naruto's outstretched hand into his own and giving it a firm shake. Alright, let's. Hokage. And 11 months, streets of Konoha. The Sandaime had come to visit. Naruto was really excited. It was not that he ever got bored of his daddy, but sometimes it was nice to have somebody who he would hug him and carry him. Daddy had explained that he could not be there for very serious reasons, but Naruto didn't really understand them. Naruto did wonder if everybody's daddies were invisible like his, and that was why he never saw any daddies in the orphanage. He also wondered why nobody talked about it then, if they all knew about the hidden daddies. Sorry I haven't been coming around recently, Naruto. The Sandaime smiled as he walked down the street, holding Naruto's palm in his grasp, their arms swinging together with every step. Naruto found that he liked the feeling. He'd seen pictures of families doing this like this, and he liked feeling like a family. "That's okay," Naruto replied, smiling toothily up at the older man, "you boring toys." The words didn't sound quite right, because in truth, the Sandaime brought much more than that, but Naruto didn't know how to put it into phrases. But, Daddy said that the Sandaime was smart, so Naruto thought that maybe the Sandaime already knew, anyway. The Sandaime's eyes crinkled as he smiled, and Naruto beamed up at him. "I heard you've been going out all by yourself now, is that true?" The Sandaime asked with a twinkle in his eyes and a gentle smile on his face. Naruto nodded happily in response, puffing up his chest in pride. Yeah. I'm a big boy now." The Hokage chuckled lightly before continuing on with a round of conversation, "And if I may ask, how did you get out here?" Naruto's face screwed up in thought. He didn't really like lying because he had read that lying was bad, but Daddy said that sometimes lying was okay too, and Naruto believed in his daddy. I heard some nurses talking about it and I wanted to see. I'm really tall now, see? I can even reach the doorknob. The Sandaime nodded his great head, "Ah, I see. And the gates. You are very tall, Naru-chan, but..." Naruto threw his hands up in the air, "Seals. They do stuff. I read about them and wanted to try and then whoosh." He really was excited. It was really neat to see his little piece of paper make the gate easy to move. He hadn't liked drawing it, but with Daddy giving always talking to him, he had gotten through. The Sandaime let out another chuckle and for a moment looked a little like Kakashi Nyasen, but that was weird because Kakashi Nyasen wasn't old and the Sandaime was very old. Naruto blinked and then the resemblance was gone and Naruto thought he probably just imagined it. "Heading into Seals are we?" The Sandaime said, a funny tone in his voice. I see. That's good to know, Naruto." Naruto didn't get it, but good was good. He closed his eyes and smiled. The Sandaime led him to a place that sold food. The stand owner greeted them pleasantly before hurrying to go get their meals. "What were we eating?" Naruto asked, only barely reaching the table with 5 sets of cushions stacked under him. He was excited. The orphanage never let them choose what they ate. "Sushi," the Sandaime replied with a smile, breaking apart Naruto's chopsticks for him and setting them down on his napkin. "It's not native to Fire Nation, but it's still something that we enjoy." Oh, truthfully, he didn't get it, but he wanted to appear smart to the Sandaime. He heard that the Sandaime was really smart and Naruto wanted to continue standing out to the Hokage. The almost 4-year-old made a note to ask Daddy about sushi later and what native meant. Daddy never talked when other people were talking to Naruto, which the boy thought was rather silly, but Daddy said it was important. So, the Sandaime posed good-naturedly, "What else has been going on in your life, Naruto? Anything interesting?" Naruto stopped squirming and trying to fix his seat by beaming brilliantly at the Sandaime. "Yeah. I met my Nai-san. Kakashi-san. He's really cool." The Sandaime chuckled, "Is that so?" "Yeah. He talks to me and smiles at me, but he didn't hug and he doesn't stare at me with those cold eyes." At the last phrase, his voice had trailed off. The Sandaime gave him a look full of sorrow, but Naruto didn't care about that. A thought had struck him, and it made him quiet. "Hey, Gigi," Naruto asked softly, swinging his legs listlessly underneath him, "can I ask you something?" "Sure, Naruto," the Sandaime replied, his voice equally as soft, "ask anything you want. I can't promise that I'll answer, but there's never anything wrong with asking." "The stores, they were," Naruto struggled to find the words and shifted his head towards a villager who had just passed one of his strawberry crates to a buyer. "They are not cold when I'm with you. They look different." For a moment, the Sandaime looked surprised, but then he quickly recovered. "Ah," he said quietly, his voice sad. Naruto knew the emotion because Daddy often sounded sad too, even if Daddy never admitted it. "Ah well, you see, I suppose that emotion that you see is love." Naruto pursed his lips. He knew what love was, of course. He was a big boy. His daddy loved him and the storybook mummies always loved their babies. And if that look that was directed at the Sandaime was love, then they really love you, Naruto said in nearly a whisper. The Sandaime looked thoughtful for a moment and then he patted Naruto's head. He smiled brightly, though there was something strained about that too. "That's probably because I'm the Hokage." "Hokage?" Naruto repeated, not really understanding. His daddy had explained that it was the position of the village leader and that it was what the Sandaime was, but never anything more than that. "Yes, the Hokage. It's my duty to protect the village, no matter what the cost. And I suppose the villagers are trying to repay that by being extra nice." Duo, he wasn't sure what "no matter what the cost" really meant, but he did understand the extra nice part. He hated how the villagers looked at him, he really did. Daddy said hate was a strong word, but Naruto was sure he wasn't wrong about this one. Naruto perked up, suddenly breaking out of his slouch as he gave the Sandaime one long, accessing look. He wanted that love, wanted it more than anything. Sometimes he found that he did not mind because his daddy was with him, but there were other times when he could not help but mind. He wanted the cold stares to go away. The Sandaime blinked down at the little blonde in surprise. "Naruto." Naruto took a deep breath and then nodded up at the village leader. A bright smile split his face and his blue eyes sparkling with determination. "You know I will earn that title of Hokage." Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the story. If you did, please like the video. Also consider subscribing and sharing this with your friends. This will really mean a lot for me. I'll see you in the next one.